You've always wondered how medieval peasants coped with war, famine, and harsh winters. So now you step into their shoes and feel every empty ache, every cold breath, every dull fear as your own. This is how you find the answers, not by watching from afar, but by waking up inside their world of faith, fear, and folklore, and staying there until the questions become slow, heavy, and no longer need words. When you first wake, you do not wake all at once. You surface slowly, like something rising through muddy water. Before your eyes open, you feel the weight of the blanket, a rough, scratchy weave that smells of smoke and wool, and a faint, sour trace of old sweat. Beneath your back, the straw mattress rustles, stalks poking through thin linen into your shoulder blades and hips. The air on your face is cold enough that your nose stings a little when you breathe in. You can taste the night still hanging there, stale, smoky, with a hint of damp earth. For a moment, you do not remember where you are. There is only the heaviness in your limbs, the ache in your lower back, the knot in your neck where you slept at an odd angle. Then a sound threads its way into your half-sleep, deep, slow, and distant at first, then clearer. A bell. One solid note rolling across the fields, then another, then another. You have heard this bell every day of your life, but this morning, caught between your old world and this new one, it feels strange and heavy. It does not just tell time, it tells you who you are and what you belong to. Each toll seems to say, wake, pray, remember. You lie there listening, counting without thinking. You know which ringing means dawn, which means mass, which calls for a funeral, which warns of fire or attack. This one is the first call of the morning, the bell that gathers up all the scattered, sleepy thoughts in the village and pulls them toward the church at its center. You open your eyes. The roof is right above you, low beams dark with age, smoke stains reaching out in fingers. Light squeezes in through the small gap where the wall does not fit perfectly against the roof, turning the dust in the air into slow, lazy, drifting shapes. To your left, you feel warmth where another body lies. Family, pressed close on the same bed of straw, because there is no sense in keeping apart when the cold comes hunting through the cracks. You hear breathing. A soft snore from one side, a child's faint whimper from another corner. The muffled shift of someone turning under a blanket. The bell continues, steady, patient. You push your arms out from under the blanket, and the cold snaps at your skin, biting at your wrists and fingers. Your hands look different here, rougher, broader, calloused along the palms in places that tell the story of tools and ropes and earth. You flex your fingers, joints crack softly. You sit up slowly so as not to wake those who can sleep a little longer. The straw whispers under you. Your breath comes out in a pale cloud, just visible in the dim light. You pull the blanket from your shoulders and feel the morning air crawl over your back, down your spine, into the hollows of your knees. Your shirt, if it can be called that, is a simple tunic of coarse cloth, patched more than once. The fabric scratches your skin, but it is a familiar scratch, like the voice of someone you have known all your life. The bell goes on. In the corner of the room near the tiny blackened hearth, a few embers still glow, stubborn and red in the ashes. Someone must have banked the fire last night, covering it carefully so that there would be something left to coax back into life this morning. Without the fire, the cold would move in more deeply, into your bones, into your lungs. Without the fire, the day would begin not just with discomfort, but with a kind of fear. You shuffle over on your knees, wrap your fingers around a charred stick, and stir the ash gently. Orange deepens. A little tongue of flame tests the air. You add a splinter of wood, then another, the smallest pieces you have, until the flame catches and begins to grow. The crackle is quiet but comforting, the first small victory of the day, heat wrestled back from the night. As you crouch there, you make the sign of the cross without thinking. Forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder. You murmur a few words that your mouth remembers even while your mind still feels thick with sleep. A short prayer learned long ago, used so often it is worn smooth inside you. Part of you is asking for the usual things: protection, a good day's work, enough food. But another part is simply doing what must be done. You do not want to be caught beginning your day without turning your thoughts, even briefly, toward God. It feels dangerous, like walking out without your shoes in winter or leaving the door unbarred at night. Behind you, there is movement. Someone shifts and sits up, grumbling softly. You turn and see a familiar face in the half-light, lines carved by years of work and worry, hair flattened on one side from sleep. Another person, smaller, rubs their eyes and stares at the fire, still more in the world of dreams than in this chilly morning. A child curls tighter under a blanket, trying to steal a few more heartbeats of warmth before the day pulls them up as well. The bell's last note hangs in the air and then falls away. The silence that follows is not really silence. It is filled with other sounds beginning. A rooster's uncertain crow somewhere outside, the thud of a door in a neighboring hut, the faint low murmur of cattle shifting in their pen. Life, waking. You know there will be a second ringing soon, closer, insisting you make your way to church. The first has warned you, the next will call you. You reach for the loaf of bread that was set aside yesterday, the one that has grown harder overnight. It is small. Smaller than you would wish, but larger than nothing. You cut it carefully with a dull knife, the crust resisting each push. Crumbs scatter across the table. You divide the pieces in your mind as you divide them with your hands. This for that person, that for this one. Maybe a little sliver left to tuck away. As you do it, you think, without needing to say it aloud, that God must see this and know how you try to be fair. Some small part of you hopes that such fairness will count when your soul is weighed, when your name is spoken aloud by an angel or a demon or whoever keeps such records. Up, a voice says quietly. It could be yours or someone else's in the family. In truth, it does not matter. Everyone knows what comes next. Clothes are pulled on, belts are tightened, feet are forced into stiff shoes that never quite dried out properly. The child is coaxed out from the blanket and made presentable enough for the eyes of neighbors and priest. You wrap a cloak around your shoulders, the wool heavy, smelling of lanolin and rain and the smoke of many days by this same hearth. You step outside. The open air hits your face like a wet cloth. The sky is low and pale, the color of milk that has been watered down one time too many. Frost clings to the edges of the path, a thin crust that crunches beneath your boots. The breath of the animals in their pens is visible, little ghosts rising and fading. The village lies quiet, but not still. Doors open. Figures emerge, gray and brown and muted, shapes moving through the morning toward the same point. The church stands slightly apart on the small rise at the center of the settlement. Its stone walls catch what little light there is more stubbornly than the wattle and daub of the cottages. The small tower above it houses the bell that woke you. A thin line of smoke curls from the priest's house nearby, carrying with it the faint smell of better wood, better bread. You look at it and feel nothing sharp, only a kind of distant acceptance. It is the way things are. He serves at the altar. You serve in the fields. Each has what that place requires. As you walk, you fall into step with others. A neighbor nods to you, then looks quickly away. Another mutters a greeting under their breath, words half swallowed by the cold. No one speaks loudly. The morning still feels thin and fragile, as if loud voices might crack it. Besides, everyone carries their own bundle of worries, and many of those worries are things that are easier to tell God than one another. You pass the well, the smithy, the stump where animals are sometimes slaughtered. Everything looks the same as it did yesterday and will look tomorrow. Yet your mind sets this morning apart because of something the bell has stirred in you. A faint sense of being seen from above. from a place far beyond the low clouds. The door of the church is heavy, thick wood banded with iron. As you reach it, you pause just long enough to dip your fingers into the stone stoop where water sits, stale and slightly green, but blessed. The cold shocks your skin as you touch it, then draw the wet chill over your forehead, your chest, your shoulders. In the dimness beyond the door, you can see the flicker of candles and hear the low murmur of voices. Inside, the air is different. It smells of wax, of damp stone, of bodies that have pressed together here hundreds of times. It is cooler than the cottage when the hearth is burning well, warmer than it when the fire is low. Shadows cling to the corners, but the central space is lit by tallow candles, their flames small and steady. You move toward your usual place, not by being told, but by the pull of habit. Others do the same. There is an order here that is not always present outside. Men in certain areas, women in others, children clinging to skirts or sleeves. You kneel on the hard floor, the wood or stone biting into your knees. It is a discomfort you know well, an ache that feels almost necessary, as if the pain itself were a kind of offering. The priest approaches the altar. He wears garments you would never see outside this building. Colors brighter, cloth finer, movements more deliberate. His voice rises, speaking words you mostly do not understand, at least not in the way you understand the price of grain or the feel of soil. The Latin flows over you like water over stones, shaping you without your needing to follow each curve. You know the outline of what is being said, if not the precise phrases. Praise, confession, plea. Your eyes drift up to the painted images on the walls. Carved figures, the bits of colored glass that catch the thin light and pull it into reds and blues. You see Christ on the cross, ribs showing, face twisted in pain. You see the Virgin holding a child, both serious and calm. You see saints with their symbols, a key, a wheel, a sword, a book. Underneath you might see something like yourself, if you squint. People on their knees, people weighed in scales, people walking in fire. Hell is very real to you here. Not as a place you can point to on a map, but as a constant possibility, a threat that curls around every story, every sermon. You have heard enough descriptions to paint your own picture. Teeth, flames, chains, laughter that is not kind. You imagine hunger that never ends, thirst that is never quenched, cold that never warms, and heat that never cools. It is worse than any winter you have lived through, worse than any famine, because it does not stop. Heaven is real, too, but it feels further away sometimes. You think of it as light, as music without instruments, as a place where nothing hurts anymore, and where you are known completely and loved completely in a way that no person on earth can manage. You know the path there is narrow, the priest reminds you often, through confession, through good works, through obedience, through suffering accepted without too much complaint. You bow your head as the congregation speaks the few responses they know in their own tongue. The words taste of habit and of need. You ask for mercy, for daily bread, for deliverance from evil. When the priest lifts the small white disk of bread in his hands, you hold your breath without meaning to. Everyone's eyes are on the same point. In that moment, the whole village seems to be leaning in one direction, souls balanced on a thin edge of expectation. You will not receive the bread yourself, not every time. That is for certain days, certain states of being. You are not always sure if you are in that state, pure enough, clean enough inside. But you know that whether or not the host touches your tongue, something important is happening. God is being brought close. You hope he looks kindly on you when he comes, that he sees how early you rose, how carefully you divided the bread at home, how you stirred the embers back to life. As the Mass goes on, the priest begins a sermon in words you understand fully. Not the Latin, but the language of your own village. He speaks of storms that destroyed crops in a far-off town, of soldiers marching through another lord's lands, of sickness that has appeared in a neighbor's house. He ties these things to sin, to pride, to God's anger, but also to God's desire that people return to him. He speaks of fear in a way that makes it feel almost holy, as if being afraid of God were better than being afraid of hunger or war. You listen, knees aching, hands folded. It is not that you believe every word in the sense that you could explain it, argue it, prove it. It is more that you do not see any other way to make sense of the world. When bad things happen, they must happen for a reason. When good things happen, they must be gifts. The idea that events might be random, that suffering might have no purpose at all, is more frightening than any picture of hellfire. At one point, the priest mentions confession, the need to speak your sins aloud and have them wiped away. You think of the small things you have done. A curse muttered under your breath, a piece of food taken when you had not been given permission, a moment of ugly envy when you saw someone with more than you. You also think of things that weigh heavier. The time you did not help a neighbor because you were too tired. The angry thoughts you held against someone who had wronged you. The bitterness that sits at the back of your tongue when you think of lords and stewards and orders that come from people who never step into the mud you work in every day. You do not know which of these matters most to God. You cannot see the list that you imagine angels keep. All you can do is kneel here, breathe the wax-scented air, and let your heart swell with the wish that somehow it will be enough to count as sorry. When Mass ends, the benches creak and scrape. People stand, kneel briefly again, then begin to move toward the door. Beside you, someone makes a sign of the cross more slowly than most, their fingers lingering on forehead and chest as if trying to press the prayer deeper. A child is scolded in a whisper for fidgeting too much. An old woman leans heavily on a stick as she rises, lips moving as she continues a private string of petitions that did not fit neatly into the communal prayers. You step back out into the daylight. The sky has brightened a little, though the sun is still hidden behind clouds. The cold feels sharper now after the dim warmth inside, but it also feels cleaner, less thick. For a moment, the village seems both smaller and larger to you. Smaller because the church has reminded you that your life is just one among many, one in a long line of lives that have walked these same paths. Larger because the stories you heard of hell, of heaven, of saints and demons stretch your world out far beyond the fields and forests you know. Outside the door, people linger. Some cross themselves again before heading off to their tasks. Others approach a small side altar where a wooden statue of a saint stands, worn shiny in places where many hands have touched it. You watch as a woman you know kneels there for a long time, her shoulders shaking. You do not hear her words, but you see the way her fingers clutch the edge of the pedestal. You know she recently buried a child. You know she will be told that her suffering is known, that it is seen, that it may even be used by God for some good you cannot fathom. You do not know if this comforts her, but she comes here anyway, again and again. You find your place in the small line to drop a coin, only one and not a large one, into the box that helps keep candles lit and roofs mended. The feel of the metal leaving your fingers is sharp. You do not have many to spare. But you think of it like adding a small stone to a wall that keeps out something worse. If giving up this coin helps hold back misfortune or earns a little mercy, it is a trade you cannot afford not to make. Someone touches your arm lightly. You turn to see a neighbor, face pinched with worry. They speak in a low rush about the rumors of war, soldiers seen on the road, talk of the king needing more men, more grain, more money. They speak of the last winter, when the stores ran low and the bell sometimes rang not to call to mass, but to toll for another person lost. Their words are full of fear that looks outward, to lords and armies and seasons and skies. You find yourself answering with words that look upward instead. God will provide, you say, though you know that provide does not always mean spare from suffering. We must pray. It is what you have been taught to say, and yet it is not empty. It is how you hold your fear in a shape you can carry. Later, as the day lengthens, you go to the fields. The work is as it always is. Bending, lifting, pulling, sweating, breathing. The earth has its own demands, its own laws. It does not care if you attended Mass, if you bowed your head or not. But you care, and that makes a difference in how you move through this space. You begin your work with a small sign of the cross, tracing invisible lines over your chest. You mutter a few words under your breath, not a full prayer, just a fragment. Bless this field. Keep away the rot, the storm, the worm. Your hands sink into the soil, breaking clods, planting seeds. Each movement is practical and physical, and also, in some deeper way, a petition. At midday, another bell from the church rings out faintly across the fields. You straighten slowly, spine protesting, and wipe your forehead with the back of your hand. You are supposed to pause here, to pray the familiar words that mark the hour. Some days you remember properly, framing your lips around every phrase. Other days, like this one, you simply turn for a moment, so that your face points toward the church, even if you cannot see it, and let your mind sink briefly into the knowledge that there is a place where people are praying, even when you are not. It is like knowing that there is a fire still burning in a hearth somewhere, even if your own has gone low. The afternoon wears on. Clouds shift the light from gray to a paler gray. Your body tires, but your mind continues its quiet weaving. It ties together the priest's words, your neighbor's worries, your own memories. It drapes them all against a background of stories you have heard since childhood, of saints who appeared to shepherds, of demons driven from villages by relics, of signs in the sky that foretold plague or peace. When a crow lands nearby and caws harshly, someone mutters that it is a bad sign. When a slight, unexpected warm breeze passes over your face, someone else muses that perhaps a good summer is coming. These observations are not casual. They are ways of reading the world that feel as natural to you as reading letters feels to someone in another time. The church has taught you to watch for meaning in everything, and the old tales have filled in colors and shapes where the church's lines were too thin. By the time the evening bell rings, calling people back once more if they can come, your muscles are trembling with weariness. You stack tools, cover what must be covered, and make your way home along the same path as in the morning. Smoke rises from chimneys now, visible against the dimming sky. The smell of cooking is thin, but it is something. You may or may not go back to the church tonight. Perhaps there is work that cannot wait. A sick animal, a child with a fever. Perhaps your knees feel too swollen for more kneeling. Even then, though, you hear the bell as it echoes over the village. It wraps around your cottage, your field, your very breathing. It tells you what time it is in a way that has little to do with the sun. The time to remember that you are small, that your fears and hopes stand inside a larger story. After the meal, a simple one, bread stretched with broth, perhaps a scrap of something richer if it was a good day. You sit by the hearth. The fire throws unsteady light on the faces around you. Shadows tremble on the walls. Someone tells a story, one you have heard many times, about a man who did not keep the feast days properly and was punished. Or about a woman who took in a stranger and later discovered she had entertained a saint in disguise. The story is part warning, part comfort, part entertainment. You feel tired. But in that tiredness there is a kind of fullness. The day has been held, from its first sound to its last, inside a pattern woven of faith and fear and old tales. The bell woke you. The priest's words shaped your thoughts. The images on the walls of the church haunted the edges of your imagination. The stories by the fire stitched together your experiences into something that feels less random. When you finally lie down again on the straw, it is with the weight of another day lived under the same watchful sky. Your body hurts in a dozen familiar places. Your stomach is not completely full, but it is not empty either. Your mind is noisy for a while, filled with worries about weather and war and sickness, about sin and judgment and the narrowness of the path to heaven. Eventually, though, The rhythm of your own breathing begins to answer the rhythm of the bell that started this day, rising and falling slowly. You murmur a last prayer, one you have said so often it feels like a well-worn cloak around your thoughts. You ask to be kept safe through the night, to be spared sudden death without confession, to be granted another morning on this earth, or, if not, a gentler place beyond. You do not know which of these will be given to you, but you know that whichever it is, it will be explained to you in the language you have been taught, the language of faith that explains what you cannot see, fear that keeps you from stepping too far off the narrow road, and folklore that wraps itself around all the rest like a vine around a tree. Sleep takes you slowly, not as an escape from this world, but as another part of it, one in which saints may visit in dreams and warnings may come in the form of strange images. You drift, and the last thing you hear, whether in your memory or outside your window, is the long, low echo of the church bell, still ringing somewhere far above the roof of your little home. You do not notice at first that the sky is wrong. When you wake, it is the same as every morning. The weight of the rough blanket on your chest, the itch of straw through the thin cloth beneath you, the stiffness in your back that has become so ordinary you only really feel it on the days when it is not there. You hear breathing around you, the small sounds of other bodies shifting in their sleep, the faint sigh of someone already half awake. For a while you lie very still, listening for the bell. But before the bell comes, there is a different sound. A gust of wind slides against the walls of the cottage with a voice that does not belong to this hour, too sharp and sudden for so early in the day. It makes the smoke hole flap, shiver, and clap, a nervous little rattle. A thin finger of cold air snakes down, brushing your forehead. You open your eyes. Darkness hangs in heavy bands above you, the beams of the roof a little too dim, as if the morning has decided to stay longer curled up under its own blanket. You sit up slowly and look toward the gap in the wall where light usually creeps in first. Today it comes in a strange color, a sort of thick gray with a yellowish cast, like old milk or bruised wax. It does not look like any morning you remember, though you have seen many. For a moment you simply stare, eyes narrowed. Then the bell begins to ring, and the familiar pattern of sound wraps itself around the unfamiliar light. You get up because you always get up when the bell rings. Your body knows the order of things better than your mind does. You move through the cramped space, stepping over limbs and bundles, stirring the fire back to life, as you did yesterday and will do tomorrow. Yet at the edge of every small act there is a prickle of unease. The light seeping under the door looks like the light of a storm, but there is no thunder. It looks like the light of evening, but the day has barely begun. When you open the door, the air hits you with a cold that is not sharper than usual, but it feels different because the sky on top of it is different. Instead of the usual pale, flat morning, the clouds have twisted themselves into long, low streaks that run like scratches across the heavens. The sun, still somewhere below the horizon, spills a sick sort of glow that turns the undersides of those clouds into the color of smoke-stained wool. There is no real brightness, only a dimness that seems to lean down. You are not alone in seeing it. Doors open all along the lane. Faces peer out, then step farther to look up. No one speaks at first. You remember stories of days when the sky turned colors before a disease came, before a war, before a flood. You do not remember if any of those stories were meant to be true, but you remember the way they were told, with lowered voices and the kind of silence at the end that lets fear seep in. Someone breaks the quiet with a low whistle. That's not a good sign, they say. They do not say, sign of what? They do not need to. The word itself is enough to set many possibilities loose in the air. You close the door again so the cold will not creep all the way to the hearth. But the image of the sky stays with you. As you help divide the bread, as you tie your cloak, as you urge a reluctant child to stand up and put on their shoes, the wrongness of the light presses at the back of your thoughts. It sits there like a stone in your shoe you cannot stop to remove. On the way to the church, you notice other things you might not have noticed on an ordinary morning. A dog refuses to leave the threshold of its master's house, whining softly instead of bounding ahead. A crow perches on the roof of the alewife's cottage, watching with an unblinking eye. There are fewer birds singing than usual. Or perhaps you are only listening for the absence of sound now. Your feet sink a little deeper into the mud of the path with each step, as if the ground is reluctant to let you go. You walk more slowly than usual, head tipped back slightly to keep the sky in view. Someone at your side mutters a prayer half under their breath, words to ward off evil, to ask for protection. You find your own lips moving with the same phrases. Not because you understand what threatens you, but because not saying them would feel like inviting whatever it is closer. Inside the church, the light from the strange sky filters through the small windows in a way that changes the color of everything. The walls look greener, the statues more shadowed, the faces in the painted scenes more hollow. Even the candles seem to burn with a more timid flame, as if nervous about drawing too much attention. The priest notices too. You can see it in the way his eyes flick toward the narrow slits of glass as he moves, in the way his voice comes out slightly louder at first, as if to compete with a silent opponent. The Mass begins, the familiar arc of words carrying you with it. But there is an undercurrent you can feel. When the time comes for the sermon, he does not speak of whatever he had planned. Instead, he speaks of signs and wonders, of the heavens declaring the glory of God, but also his anger. He tells a story of how, in another place and another time, the sky turned red like blood for 3 days for a great war. He speaks of a night when the stars fell like rain before a famine. He reminds everyone that nothing happens above that does not mean something below. You listen, fingers knotted together so tightly your knuckles ache. You try to decide whether you believe him, or whether you only know that you cannot afford to decide he is wrong. When Mass ends, people spill out of the church in a slow, uneasy stream. They do not disperse as quickly as usual. Instead, they cluster in small knots, heads bent together like birds huddling under a hedge. You catch fragments of speech as you pass. Last time the sky looked like this? My grandfather said there was sickness. They say in the next village a cow birthed a calf with 2 heads. My cousin in the town saw a comet last year, and after that the Lord raised the taxes. It all connects. The words tangle together, a net of stories thrown over the sky to try to catch an explanation. You add your own threads silently. You remember a summer years ago when the clouds stacked high and dark for days, and then a storm came that flattened the grain. You remember the way people said afterward that they had known, that the air had felt wrong. You remember an autumn when the sunsets were strangely beautiful, and not long after, a sickness began to spread. At the time, you had not felt a link, but now, under this warped morning light, your mind reaches back and ties those events together. You glance toward the priest. He stands near the doorway, talking to a small group of men who have come to ask his opinion more directly. You see his hands making gestures, his head nodding gravely. You imagine his words, even if you cannot hear them. Calls to repentance, admonitions to examine one's soul, reminders that God uses signs to turn his children back from dangerous paths. You do not doubt that some paths need turning. You can list your own failings easily enough. But you also know there are things no amount of confession can change. The thinness of the soil on certain fields, the greed of some men, the way frost comes or does not come, no matter how many candles are lit. The line between what is punishment and what is simply the way the world is feels very thin from where you stand. Eventually, there is no more excuse to linger. The day waits, and so does the work. You walk back along the same path, your eyes still drawn upward now and then. The sky has not changed much. Perhaps the streaks of cloud have shifted slightly, the pale glow grown a shade brighter. But the sense of being under a watchful dome remains. Out in the fields, the earth is damp and heavy. Your boots sink, and each step pulls at your legs. Your breath forms small, steady clouds in front of you. You pick up your tools and move to the place where you left off yesterday. The work is the same as always, but your mind is not. You notice the way the furrows run across the land like lines in a palm, and you wonder what someone with the right kind of eyes would read in them. As you bend to plant, you think of seeds as prayers. Each one disappears into the dark, not knowing what will rise above it. A strong stalk, a stunted shoot, nothing. You press the soil back with your hands, fingers numbing in the cold, and you mutter small phrases you have heard older people say in the fields. Grow well, take root. God sends sun and rain in measure. The words are half spell, half plea, entirely habit. From time to time, you straighten your back and look around. Others are working too. Some glance at the sky as you do. A few cross themselves when a cloud passes in front of the sun and makes the light dim even further. One woman spits on the ground and draws a quick shape in the dirt with the toe of her shoe, a little sign her grandmother taught her to ward off bad luck. You do not remember exactly what the sign means, only that it feels wrong to walk over it afterward. In the distance, near the boundary of your lord's land, a flock of birds suddenly rises from a copse of trees, churning into the air like smoke. Someone calls out, pointing. "They're leaving," he says. "They can feel something coming." No one laughs at him. No one tells him the birds might simply have been startled by a fox or a child. Everyone watches the flock swirl and then move away. For a moment, there is a small, shared silence in which you all imagine that the birds know more than you do. Later, on your way to the stream to fetch water, you notice a patch of ground where the frost has melted in a strange pattern. The grass is flattened in a circle, as if something had lain there during the night. You stand and look at it, your bucket empty at your side. It could have been an animal. A cow escaped from the pen, perhaps, or a drunk who stumbled off the path and slept where he fell. Those are the quick explanations your practical mind offers. But another part of you, fed by stories of spirits and demons and wandering souls, whispers that it might be a sign. A place where something not entirely of this world rested. A mark left by a presence that does not want you here. You find yourself making the sign of the cross again, almost sharply, as if to cut that thought away. You move on, but you do not forget. At supper, your tongue itches to tell someone, to see the way their eyes widen, to hear what story they will attach to the flattened grass. You know that if you say nothing, the circle will still exist, but it will not become part of the village's memory. It will stay only in your mind, heavier for having nowhere to echo. In the end, you do speak of it. In a quiet moment when the day has softened and the fire has settled into coals. The reaction is what you expected. An older man nods and mentions a tale of a night-walking spirit that lies in fields and steals the strength of the crops. A woman shakes her head and says it is more likely the witch from the next village, the one everyone whispers about but no one confronts, who sends her shadow ahead of her to find places to harm. Someone else suggests that perhaps an angel rested there, guarding you all. You cannot tell which version unsettles you more. The priest would perhaps frown at some of these explanations, dismissing them as superstition. He would remind you that God is sovereign over fields and spirits alike, that Jesus, not some nameless creature, walks on the earth to watch and judge. But he is not here tonight. Here in the half-dark of the cottage, the stories that flow most easily are the ones that curl around your childhood fears and your adult worries in equal measure. When a storm comes a few days later, it feels almost like confirmation of every murmur that has filled the village since that strange morning sky. The clouds gather quickly, black and heavy, as if pulled into place by an invisible hand. The wind rises, finding every crack and chink in the cottages, poking fingers of cold into your sleeves and under your collar. Thunder rolls in long, deep voices that sound to your fear-tuned ears, like the growl of something large and impatient. You and your family move through the small rituals you have learned for such times. You bring the animals closer, checking locks and latches twice. You move tools indoors. Someone hangs a sprig of herb above the door, blessed earlier in the year at a feast day, dried and saved for a moment like this. You make sure the iron tools are not left lying in the doorway because someone once said that attracts lightning. Someone else says the opposite, that iron wards it off. You do not know which is true, so you compromise as best you can. When the rain comes, it comes hard. It rattles on the roof like thrown pebbles, turns paths into streams, blurs the edges of the fields into one gray sheet. Inside, the noise fills your ears. Lightning flashes, white and sudden, painting the interior of the cottage in stark shapes for an instant, before plunging it back into a deeper shadow. Each time it happens, you cannot help but flinch. You are not alone. Even the bravest looking among you ducks their head. Between the crashes, the stories rise again. Someone recalls a house that burned down in another village after a bolt struck it. Someone else insists that a man they knew was killed because he cursed God aloud during a storm. A third person tells a story their grandmother told, of seeing in the flash of lightning the outline of a vast hand in the clouds. You sit there, listening, the thunder crawling around your ribs like a beast searching for a way in. You try to hold on to the priest's words about God's power and protection, about Christ calming storms with a command. But those stories feel distant, set on another sea under another sky. The stories told here, in this cramped space that smells of wet wool and fear and smoke, feel nearer. You have never seen Christ stretch his hand out over your fields, but you have seen storms flatten your crops. You have never seen a demon with horns and a tail, but you have seen men driven to desperate acts by hunger and fear. You find a middle path, without naming it as such. You pray as you have been taught. Our Father, Hail Mary, snatches of Latin that you do not quite understand, but that feel strong in your mouth. At the same time, you tuck your feet under you so they do not rest flat on the ground, the way your mother taught you, because lightning travels through the earth. You cross yourself when the thunder is loudest. And you also touch the small charm sewn into the hem of your shirt, the one an old woman gave you years ago while muttering words that were not part of any liturgy. When the storm finally passes, leaving behind broken branches, a few scattered tiles, maybe a small stand of grain bent but not destroyed, the air feels washed out and raw. The light is clearer. The sky looks ordinary again. You step outside and squint up at it, half expecting to see some mark left behind, a crack, a scar, a written word. There is nothing. Still, the world does not feel quite the same. It feels as if a hand that had been hovering just above the village has now withdrawn, leaving the memory of its weight. In the days that follow, you find yourself watching for patterns more closely. When a child falls ill, you think back to where they played, to what they ate, to whether they laughed during Mass or crossed themselves properly. When a cow goes dry or a hen stops laying, you wonder if it is the work of nature or of a curse or of God. When a stranger passes through the village and does not answer questions about where they came from, your eyes linger on the shape of their shadow, the way their footprints fall. Faith tells you that God is in control of all things, that nothing happens except by His will or permission. Fear tells you that His will might be hard, and His permission wide. Folklore slips in the gaps between those two, offering stories in which smaller powers move, spirits in wells, saints in fields, wolves that are more than wolves. Each of these ways of seeing the world gives you something, a way to name your dread, a way to bargain, a way to feel less alone. When you walk across your fields alone at dusk, the sky fading from blue to a deep, soft charcoal, you sometimes feel as if eyes are on you from every side. From the crows sitting in the bare branches, from the carved faces on the church, from the very clouds themselves. You cannot see God, but you feel the pressure of the stories about Him. You cannot see demons, but you feel the edge of the tales told about them. You cannot see the future, but you see signs everywhere that might point toward it. One evening, as you return home, you notice the moon has a ring around it, a pale, ghostly circle that seems to hover like a halo. You stop in your tracks, breath misting the air. You have heard that such a ring means snow is coming, or rain, or war, or death, depending on who is telling it. Someone else on the path sees it too. They stand beside you, eyes fixed upward. And for a long moment, neither of you speaks. Finally, they exhale slowly. Some say it means the angels are walking around the edges of the world, they murmur. Some say it means the dead are close. You swallow. What do you say it means? You ask. Though you are not sure, you want to know. They shrug, the gesture small and tired. I say it means we had better be in church on Sunday, they answer, and not miss any chance to be on the right side of things. The answer is both more and less than you were hoping for. It does not explain the ring. It does not tell you whether this winter will be hard or whether soldiers will soon march past your door. But it gives you a path, and a path is something. Be in church, say the prayers, light the candles, watch the sky and the ground for signs, but never forget the bell. In the quiet of that moment, with the moon looking down like an eye rimmed in light, you realize how thoroughly your days are wrapped in the idea that the world is always speaking to you, in one language or another. Sometimes the voice is the priest's, echoing against stone. Sometimes it is your neighbor's, sudden and sharp in the field. Sometimes it is the groan of thunder or the whisper of wind under the door. You do not always understand what is being said, but you cannot stop listening. To stop would be to step out of the story everyone around you is telling, and you are not sure there is any life outside that story. So you walk on, under the ringed moon, across the damp earth that holds both your footprints and your fears. Tomorrow perhaps the sky will look ordinary again, and you will joke a little about how nervous everyone was today. Or perhaps tomorrow will bring a messenger with news of war, or a morning when someone does not wake. Either way, you will greet it through the same web. Faith that tries to make sense of it, fear that tightens your chest, and folklore that spins explanations out of clouds and crows and circles of flattened grass. You have always wondered how medieval peasants coped with war and famine and harsh winters. You begin to see that one way they coped was by never letting the world be silent. You do not set out to bargain with heaven. Not at first. At first, it is simply another day that begins with the bell, with the stiffness in your back, with the familiar weight of worry in your chest. You wake the way you always wake, slowly, with the awareness of cold creeping in at the edges of the blanket, with the knowledge that there is never quite enough time, never quite enough bread, never quite enough certainty about what the year will bring. You sit up. You hear a cough from somewhere in the room, rough and deep, the kind that has been getting worse over the last weeks. It does not belong to you. It belongs to someone you love. And every time you hear it, something tightens in your stomach, like a knot pulled one twist further. You have tried the usual remedies, herbs from the hedge, broths thinned down to water, rest where rest is possible. You have prayed, of course. You have knelt in the little church and said the words you know by heart. You have whispered your own clumsy ones into the darkness before sleep. And yet the cough lingers, and with it the fear that one morning it will stop, not because the person is better, but because they are gone. The bell rings, slow and heavy in the distance. You move through the morning tasks as if your body were a machine wound long ago, the same motions repeating with small variations. Stir the fire, share the bread, pull on the worn cloak, wrap cloth around your feet. The cough echoes again, soft but insistent, like a reminder of a question you have not answered. By the time you reach the church, the thought has taken shape fully enough to be recognized. Perhaps what you have done so far is not enough. Perhaps the prayers you say every day, faithful as they are only the beginning. Perhaps you need help. help from someone closer to God than you are, someone whose voice carries more weight when it echoes in heaven. You have heard, after all, that saints listen. You have heard that relics heal. The priest's sermon this morning is about just such things. He speaks of Saint so-and-so, who suffered and died for the faith, and now reigns in glory, who has been known to cure fevers, to ease childbirth, to protect travelers on the road. He speaks of the relics that were brought to a town not too far from yours, a fragment of bone, a scrap of cloth, a splinter of wood from some holy place, and of the miracles that followed. A blind man who saw, a lame child who walked, a woman who had not conceived in years, who now waits for a child. You listen with your hands clasped, knuckles white. The cough has not left your ears, even here, even now, where the air smells of wax and stone and the murmur of prayers. You picture the person you love bending under the weight of that coughing, the way their shoulders shake, the way their breath seems to catch in the net of their ribs. You picture them standing here, or not standing. You imagine the place on the floor where their knees would go if they came with you. The priest says that, by the grace of God, a relic will be brought to the nearby town in a few days' time. It belongs to a great abbey, he says, but it will travel through the countryside so that poor folk like you may venerate it. It is a part of a saintly body. He names the saints, listing virtues and deeds that feel half like history and half like legend. You do not remember all the details, but you understand the important part. This saint is said to be especially merciful to the sick, to those weighed down by pain and fear. You look up at the painted saints on the walls. Their wooden or stone faces stare back, expressionless, and yet somehow full. You wonder what it means for a piece of such a person to exist in the world still, to be carried in a box from one place to another, to be touched and kissed and wept over. You wonder if a sliver of bone or a fold of cloth can really hold any power. You wonder if it matters whether it does, or whether the hope itself is the thing that moves the world. After Mass, people do not rush away. They hang back, clustering around the priest, asking questions. When will the relic arrive? How long will it stay? Who may come? Will it cost anything? You stand at the edge of this knot of bodies, listening.
It is 3 days' walk, perhaps, someone says. If we leave early, we might arrive by the second day.
I heard that in that town there is a market the same week, another adds. We could bring eggs, wool, something to sell. I heard that a girl who touched the saint's reliquary there last year was cured of a wasting sickness, says another voice. My cousin's neighbor's sister saw it herself. The stories begin to build around the news like walls around a courtyard. Some are simple and direct. Others are tangled, passing through many mouths before they reach yours. Each retelling adds a detail. More candles, more tears, more cures. The relic becomes not just a bone in a box, but a door into a possibility when you go home. The decision is not yet made, but it is heavy in the air. At the hearth, over the thin stew, you speak of it. You speak of the cough. You speak of the saint. You speak of the road, of the days it would take, of the fields that will not tend themselves while you are gone. You speak of the cost in time and food and strength. You do not need to speak of the other cost, the cost of not going, the cost of sitting and listening to that cough and knowing there might have been a chance you did not take. That cost sits in the space between your words, like another person at the table. In the end, you decide you will go. You will not go alone. Others have made the same calculation and reached the same answer. There is comfort in this. You will share the road with familiar faces, share the weight of uncertainty and the small comforts of company. You will also share the hope, that dangerous, fragile thing that you must handle carefully so it does not break you if it breaks itself. The morning you leave is colder than you would like. Frost crystals lace the edges of the path, and your breath comes out in faint, white bursts as you hoist the small bundle that holds what you will need. A crust of bread, perhaps a bit of cheese, a strip of cloth, a small token to bring near the relic if you are able. You wrap your cloak tighter around you and step out into the half-light. Others are already gathered near the village edge. A few carry walking sticks, sturdy lengths of wood to lean on when the miles begin to feel longer. One has a small donkey, ribs showing under a shaggy coat, plodding patiently with a basket tied to its side. Faces are solemn, but there are flickers of something else, something like excitement, or the relief of moving toward a goal instead of standing still under the weight of fear. The priest blesses you before you leave. He raises his hand, traces the sign of the cross in the air, and speaks words over you about safe travels and fruitful devotion. You bow your head. The blessing settles on your shoulders like a cloak woven of words. You hope it will be thick enough to keep out ill luck on the road. Then you walk. The first stretch is familiar, the paths you take to the nearby fields and to the small market where you sometimes go. But soon you pass beyond the edges of what you know well. The landscape does not change dramatically. There are still fields, hedges, clumps of trees, the occasional farmstead. Yet each step takes you further from your own hearth, your own bed, your own routines. There is a strangeness in that. As the hours pass, you feel your body in ways you do not normally feel it. Your feet begin to throb a little, each stone in the path making itself known. Your shoulders ache from holding your bundle, your hand stiffening around the stick if you carry one. Your stomach reminds you, at intervals, that you did not pack as much food as you might have wanted. There is time for talking, and there is time for silence. In the talking times, you share stories to fill the air, to distract your minds from the distance ahead. You repeat the tales of the saint whose relic you will visit. Each telling smooths them further, but also sharpens certain points. The mercy, the miracles, the times when prayer seemed to bend the path of suffering. You also tell smaller stories, ones about your own village, your own lives. You speak of the year the frost came early, and the way everyone gathered in the church to beg for a reprieve, and how the next week brought unseasonable warmth. You speak of the time a child was lost in the woods, and then found, claiming to have been guided home by a figure in white. Was it a saint? An angel? A kind stranger? No one ever knew for certain, but the story has grown around it like ivy on stone. In the quiet times, you listen to your own breathing, to the crunch of your boots, to the song of birds you do not recognize. The road itself feels like a kind of prayer, a long, slow offering of discomfort and effort. You tell yourself that each aching step is noticed by God, that each mile adds weight to your plea. You do not think of it as a trade, exactly, not buying a miracle with blisters and hunger, but it feels something like that. If you are willing to do this, perhaps heaven will be more willing to listen. At night, when the light fails and you can walk no more, you make camp where you can. In a barn if someone offers it, on the floor of a church if a priest allows it, under a tree if there is nothing else. You huddle close to those you know, sharing blankets and stories, and the thin warmth of a small fire if you dare to light one. The stars above look the same, but they seem closer, as if watching your little knot of pilgrims with a more focused gaze. You dream strange dreams. In one, you walk into a church filled with light so bright it hurts your eyes, and when you look at the reliquary, you see your own face reflected, older and calmer. In another, you stand before a door that will not open, no matter how hard you push, until you place your worn walking boots on the threshold, and then it swings wide. You wake, unsure how to read these images. You add them to the growing collection of signs and stories in your mind. On the third day, when your body feels like a sack of sore muscles and your feet are a map of pain, someone at the front of your group calls out. "There," they say, pointing. You lift your head and squint. At first, all you see is a smudge on the horizon. Then the smudge resolves into shapes, towers, roofs, a line of wall, the town. And beyond, rising above the cluster of buildings like a ship's mast, the spire of the church, or abbey, where the relic waits. As you draw nearer, the air changes. There is more smell, smoke, cooking, animals. Too many bodies packed close together. There is more sound. Wheels on ruts, voices calling. The shout of a seller, the cry of a child who has lost sight of a parent. You are no longer walking only among fields and hedges. You are approaching a place where many people have brought their needs and their coins to be met. The road into the town is lined with stalls. Some sell food, flatbreads steaming on stones, pots of stew, small skewers of meat that smell so rich your empty stomach twists. Others sell objects, candles in bundles, rosaries, small medallions with saints painted on them, pieces of cloth, leather shoes. Still others offer services, a woman who reads palms, a man who sharpens knives, a scribe who, for a fee, will write a letter or a prayer in careful script. You move through this gauntlet slowly, your senses overloaded. The saint's relic is somewhere ahead, in the stone heart of the town. But on the way you must pass through this ring of trade. You notice how many of the things on offer are tied in some way to the business of faith. Candles to burn before altars, tokens to hang near beds, charms that may or may not have official blessing but carry the shape of a cross or the image of a saint. It is hard not to see the pattern. Here, hope is not only prayed, it is bought and sold. A little silver for wax, a few coins for a strip of cloth said to have touched a shrine. You do not have much money. Every coin you carry is a decision. Candle or bread, token or extra wool for the coming cold. Each choice feels like laying a piece of yourself on a scale whose balance you cannot see. You reach the church where the relic is housed. It is larger than the one in your village, its stone smoother, its entrance carved with figures whose faces have been worn by weather and fingers over many years. Inside, the air is thicker, full of smoke from more candles than you have ever seen in one place. The light from them makes the shadows dance on the vaulted ceiling, turning the stone into something almost alive. There is a line. Of course, there is a line. People stand pressed close together, shuffling forward slowly, eyes fixed on the distant glimmer of gold and glass where the reliquary rests. Some hold objects in their hands, rosaries, pieces of cloth, small wooden carvings. Some carry children. Some lean heavily on sticks. You find your place at the end of this line and wait. Waiting has its own rhythm. At first, you are impatient, eager to move, to reach the front, to see for yourself what so many have come to see. Then the discomfort of standing begins to press in. Your feet, already sore from walking, protest the stillness. Your knees ache, your back complains. You shift your weight from side to side, easing one pain only to awaken another. Around you, voices rise and fall in low murmurs. Some pray aloud, their words a steady stream. Some whisper to neighbors, sharing stories of why they have come. A woman in front of you speaks of a son gone to war, of the fear that eats at her every day, of the hope that the saint will protect him. A man behind you mentions a bad harvest, the way his storehouse echoes when he steps inside. You listen, and your own reasons seem both smaller and exactly the same size as theirs. Sick bodies, empty stomachs, lost sons, frightened hearts, different shapes of the same need. As you draw nearer, you can see the reliquary more clearly. It is a box of gold and glass, or perhaps just gilded metal. You cannot tell for certain. It glows in the candlelight, covered in tiny figures and patterns that mean little to you but look costly. Inside, on a cushion or cloth, lies the relic, a small, curved piece of bone, perhaps, or a fragment of something preserved. It is not impressive in itself. It is what people say about it that gives it weight. That this bone once walked the earth as part of a holy man or woman, that through it, God's power has passed and still passes. When your turn finally comes, you are almost lightheaded with a long mixture of hunger, fatigue, hope, and the thick air of the church. You step forward. A man standing near the reliquary gestures for you to kneel. You do. The stone is cold under your knees. You take the small token you brought, a strip of cloth, perhaps, or a simple wooden cross carved by your own hand, and hold it near the glass. You touch the reliquary with the tips of your fingers. For a moment, you close your eyes. The noise of the church fades to a dull hum. You think of the cough. You think of the person waiting back home, their face pale in the firelight. You think of all the other things you cannot name in one breath. The war rumors, the thinness of your grain, the weight on your own heart. You do not have eloquent words. You do not imagine yourself able to speak beautifully to God or to the saint. Instead, you lay your thoughts out in their plainness. Please, help, see us. Do not forget us. If there is a way, if there is a mercy, let it come here. For a moment, just a moment, you have the sensation of being very small and very seen, both at once, as if a gaze has landed directly on the narrow space you occupy. It is not a vision. You do not see a figure, do not hear a voice. You feel only an inward loosening, as if something inside you that had been knotted too tightly has been allowed a small breath. Then the moment passes. The man at the reliquary touches your shoulder lightly, signaling that it is time to move on. Others wait behind you. You stand, legs shaky, and step aside. As you move away, someone else kneels where you knelt, their own token pressed to the glass, their own invisible bundle of fear and hope spread before the silent bone. You find a place along the wall to sit for a while. Your knees throb, your back complains. You watch the line moving, the candles burning, the faces passing. Some leave with tears on their cheeks, others with a tightness in their jaw that might be disappointment, might be determination. It is impossible to tell what has happened inside each of them at that glass barrier. You see, too, the practical arrangements that surround this holy center. There are boxes for coins. There are tables where candles are sold. There are monks who move through the crowd, guiding, instructing, sometimes gently urging people along so the line will not grow too long. There is an order to the flow of bodies and money and words. Does this cheapen what happened to you on your knees? You are not sure. Part of you feels uneasy at the sight of coins dropping, of hands reaching for wax and parchment, of a monk accepting a small offering in exchange for a written prayer to be placed near the relic. Part of you understands that churches do not maintain themselves, that candles and bread and stone all cost something. Part of you is simply too tired to unravel the knot. When you leave the church, blinking in the outside light, the town seems even louder and busier than before. You move through the crowd, clutching your token, now, in your mind, changed by contact with the relic, as if it were something fragile and precious. You do not feel the cough ease, or the hunger vanish, or the fear dissolve. You did not expect miracles to happen that quickly. Not really. What you do feel is a shift, small but real. You have done something. You have gone. You have asked. You have, in your own way, bargained, not with coin alone, but with effort, with miles walked, with hours waited on aching knees. On the road back, the world looks both the same and different. The fields you pass belong to others, but they look like your own. The sky has gone back to its pale, ordinary self. The birds hop in the hedges, indifferent to relics and saints and human fear. Your feet still hurt. Your back is still sore. And yet there is a thread now running through your discomfort, a thought you can curl your fingers around when anxiety rises. I have been. I have asked. The saint has heard. When you finally reach your village again, the familiar shapes of cottages and the small church feel oddly small after the big stone walls of the town. You step through your own doorway and breathe in the smell you know. Smoke, straw, the lingering scent of whatever meal was last cooked here. You see the person whose cough has carried you here and back. You notice how their chest rises and falls, how their eyes brighten just a little when they see you. You place your token near their bed, or hang it where it will catch the corner of your eye each day. You tell them haltingly about the journey, about the church, about the relic. You describe the candles, the line, the feeling of the cold stone under your knees, the tiny shift you felt when you touched the glass. As you speak, you are aware that you are spinning another story, adding another layer to the tapestry of faith and fear and folklore that already hangs over your lives.
In the days that follow, you watch. You watch the cough, the fever, the hunger, the weather. Any improvement, however small, feels like an answer. A day with fewer coughing fits, a night of deeper sleep, a morning when the person you love manages to stand and move without as much effort. You attribute these changes to many things at once: the herbs, the rest, the slow turning of the season. And quietly, stubbornly, you attribute them to the saint. If things worsen instead, you will have another story ready. Perhaps it is not yet time. Perhaps this is a trial. Perhaps the saint is helping, but in a way you cannot see. Hope is good at rewriting itself to survive. It has to be, in a world where so much is uncertain. You have always wondered how peasants like you coped with the relentless weight of hunger, war, sickness, and cold. Now, having walked the long road to a relic and back, you see one answer more clearly. They did not cope by standing still under the sky and waiting. They coped by moving toward any point of light offered to them. A bone in a box, a painted face on a wall, a story told by a priest or a neighbor. They brought their fear to those points and laid it there, mixed with coins and candles and miles and pain. You do not know, and may never know, how much of the power in this exchange comes from heaven, and how much comes from the human heart twisting itself into a shape it can live with. You only know that when you kneel before a saint's relic, the burden you carry feels, if not lighter, then at least shared. And sometimes on a hard, gray day, that is the difference between standing up again and sinking down for good. You go to sleep that night with the image of the reliquary still lingering on the inside of your eyelids. Gold and glass and bone, candles flickering around it like small stars. You drift off, imagining that somewhere beyond your small cottage roof and your small village church, a saint with a name you will never pronounce correctly turns their attention briefly toward you, and you breathe a little easier. You do not decide to fear the dark. The dark comes first, and the fear follows it like a shadow. By day, your world is small but clear. You know the lines of the fields, the bend of the path to the well, the way the smoke rises from each cottage. You recognize faces at a distance by the way they carry themselves. You can see where you are stepping, what your hands are doing, which clouds might mean rain, and which will simply drift by. Even when you are tired, even when you are hungry, the light lets you believe that for a little while you understand what surrounds you. But when the sun goes down, everything changes shape. It begins long before full darkness, in that slow, uncertain hour when the sky starts to divide itself into layers of pale and deepening blue. Shadows stretch and mix together, edges soften. The corners of the cottage that were merely dusty in daylight grow thick and obscure, seeming to hide more than they reveal. The air cools, and with the cold comes a familiar tightening at the base of your neck, a small coil of alertness. You know what needs to be done as evening falls. The list is as fixed as any prayer. Bring the animals in closer, latch the pens, bank the fire properly, make sure the door bar is ready to slide into place. You move through these tasks along with everyone else, hands busy, eyes already flicking toward the window or the door, measuring how much light remains. There is a particular moment each day when you are suddenly aware that if something were to happen outside now, a shout, a cry, the sound of hooves, you would not be able to see clearly enough to know what it was right away. That the world beyond the circle of your home has slipped from your grasp. It is not yet dangerous, but it could become so at any time. That moment is when your thoughts begin to thicken with old stories. You remember the priest's sermons about the devil and his angels, about demons that stalk the world seeking the ruin of souls.
You see in your mind the painted figure near the church door, a twisted creature with claws and horns, teeth bared, dragging a chain of the damned. You have looked at it often enough to know the details, to trace the lines of its body in your memory when you lie in your straw bed later. But you also remember other images, ones the priest does not talk about, or at least not in quite the same way. You remember the stories told by the fire when you were small, stories your parents said you were too young to hear and yet told anyway. Stories of things that sit on your chest at night so you cannot breathe. Stories of women who can slip out of their bodies and fly to secret gatherings, of animals that are not really animals, of lights that move in the marsh and lead people away from home. Those stories have faces too, though they are not painted on the church walls. They are painted in the air, in the way people's eyes dart toward the door when the wind howls, in the way their voices drop when they speak certain names. Tonight, as you hurry to finish your chores before full dark, the wind has a strange sound. It comes from the north, sharp and thin, carrying with it the smell of distant snow, even though the sky is still relatively clear. It threads through gaps in the cottage walls, making the thatch rustle. You think of it as fingers, or claws, or the breath of something standing just outside. You know it is only air, but you cannot stop giving it shape. The animals are restless. The cow snorts and shifts, hooves clattering on the packed earth. The chickens mutter and rearrange themselves more often than usual, wings rustling. The pig, usually content to flop heavily into the same corner each night, stands with its head up, ears twitching at each sound.
Something has them spooked, someone says. They can sense things we cannot.
You have heard that many times. It is one of the threads that ties the animals into your web of signs and meanings. A dog that refuses to enter a house, a horse that shies away from a particular place in the road, a flock of geese that starts screaming in the dead of night. All can be, in the mind trained by stories, warnings. Of what exactly is never entirely clear. That uncertainty is part of what makes the warnings powerful. Once the animals are as settled as they will be, you go inside and shut the door. The bar slides into place with a satisfying weight. You know logically that it would not stop a determined band of men with axes or a hungry wolf or fire. But it feels like a line drawn between your small circle of light and the rest of the night. On one side, you, your family, the fire, the bowl of thin stew, the crust of bread. On the other, everything else. The fire is not large because wood is not limitless, but it is enough. Its light softens faces, making lines look deeper but also more blended. It brings out the reddish tones in the clay of the floor, the gleam on the metal pot, the sheen of grease on the walls where smoke has kissed them for years. Beyond its circle, shadows pool. You eat. The food is simple. Your jaw works, your tongue finds the same flavors it finds most nights. But the taste seems a little sharper, because you know that once the bowl is empty and put aside, there will be nothing more to do with your hands except twist them together and listen. Evening is work. Night is thinking. The children, if there are children, cling closer at this time of day. Their earlier games quiet down. They watch the adults' faces more closely, sensing the change in the air, even if they do not have names for it. They know that this is the hour when stories can both comfort and terrify. It does not take much to begin. Someone mentions a sound they heard the previous night, a scraping on the roof, a tapping at the shutter, a low moan like the wind, but not quite. Someone else snorts and says it was just a branch, a loose board, a fox. But even as they dismiss it, they lean a little closer to the fire. From there, the stories flow. They are never new, not entirely. They are versions of versions, passed down, altered, shaved down to their most gripping parts. You have heard them before and will hear them again. Still, each telling is a little different, shaped by the teller's mood, by the particular fears of the day, by the way the shadows fall. There is the tale of the man who stayed too late in the fields and had to walk home after the bell rang for night prayers. He hurried along the path, feeling the dark pressing close. On the road, he met a stranger who fell into step beside him. The stranger spoke in a voice that sounded like many voices at once. When they reached the village, the man turned to thank his companion, only to see the stranger's feet backwards on his legs.
You know the lesson of that story. Be home before dark, or share the road with things that are not human.
There is the story of the woman who did not cover her mirror at night, and so saw in its surface not her own face, but the face of someone who had died. After that, she sickened, or her child did, or her crops failed. The details shift, but the core remains. The boundary between the living and the dead is thinner in the dark, and reflections can be doors.
There are stories of witches, too. Not the kind with pointed hats and broomsticks that you might imagine from another time, but women whose names you know, or think you know. The one who lives alone at the far edge of the village, who knows too much about herbs, who was seen once in the company of a strange black cat. The old widow whose children are dead, and whose neighbors always seem to have bad luck if they quarrel with her.
The midwife who mutters words under her breath during a difficult birth.
Sometimes in these stories, the witch is clearly a figure of fear. She curses cows and blights crops, calls storms, sends nightmares to those who have offended her. But sometimes, and this is the part you do not quite say aloud in front of the priest, she is also the one people go to when nothing else helps. When the child's fever does not break, when the pain in the joints will not ease, when the prayers at church feel too far away from the bed where someone lies sweating and shaking. You know of such a woman, or perhaps more than one. You know the path to her door as well as you know the way to the church, though you walk it less often and usually in more fear. You have stood in her threshold, the smell of dried herbs and old smoke curling around you, and watched her move her hands over a cup of water or a bundle of leaves, while muttering words that are not from any liturgy. You have felt, in that moment, a mixture of hope and guilt. Hope that she might succeed where others have not. Guilt that what you are doing might be, as the priest says, trusting in powers other than God. The priest speaks often against such things. He warns of charms and spells, of love potions and curses, of pacts with evil forces. He says that anyone who tries to bend the world with words not given by the church is in danger of losing their soul. He insists that sickness and misfortune are given or allowed by God for his purposes, and that turning to witches or cunning folk is like turning your back on the only true source of help. And yet, there is always a gap between what he says and what you do. When your child is burning with fever at midnight and the church doors are closed and the priest is fast asleep far away, it is hard to think only in terms of doctrine. It is easier to think in terms of who is awake, who will open their door, whose herbs have worked before. The boundary between saint and witch, between holy charm and forbidden spell is thin from where you live. You own, or have seen in other homes, objects that occupy that boundary. A small bag, sewn shut and hung near a cradle, containing something you are not supposed to open, but that you know as a scrap of saint's cloth and a pinch of salt, and perhaps a hair or two. A wax tablet, inscribed with a few Latin words whose meaning no one can quite explain, but which were once written by someone in a monastery. A piece of iron hammered into the threshold to keep bad things from crossing. Each object is a compromise. It tries to combine the blessing of the church with the old habits of the countryside. It lets you feel that you are not entirely disobedient, not entirely reckless in your dealings with unseen things. You say your prayers over these objects. You bring them to the priest on certain days to be sprinkled with holy water. You also hide them from him sometimes, if you fear he might disapprove of what you have sewn together. Tonight, as the fire burns low and the wind scratches at the roof, someone at the hearth mentions a noise they heard 2 nights ago. Something heavy on the roof, they say. Slow, like footsteps. You remember it too now. A dull thump, a slide, another thump. In the moment, half asleep, you had imagined tiles shifting or a branch falling. Now, under the pressure of stories, your mind supplies other possibilities. A demon crawling, a witch riding the night, a soul that cannot find rest.
Did you put the iron tongs by the hearth? Someone asks. The priest says we don't need such things, but my mother always did it, and we never had trouble while she was alive.
You glance at the tongs. They sit there, black and solid, ordinary yet somehow also like a weapon. You remember your mother's voice, singing a half prayer, half rhyme as she laid them across the hearthstone. Iron strong and fire bright, keep all dark things out tonight. You do not know if the words work. You know only that they are part of the feeling of being less helpless. Later, when the coals have settled, someone must go outside one last time. There is always one more task. Securing a loose shutter, checking on a calf, emptying a pot, bringing in something forgotten. Tonight, it is your turn. You wrap your cloak around you and lift the bar from the door. The sound it makes is louder than usual in your ears, an invitation for everything outside to notice.
The night rushes in. It smells of damp earth, of cold, of smoke from other fires, of something faintly sour you cannot name. The darkness is thick, pressed up against the threshold like a body. You step into it because you must. The door closes softly behind you, leaving only a thin line of light at the bottom. Your eyes take time to adjust. At first, the world is nothing but shapes. A darker mass where the barn stands, a lighter blur where the path reflects the faintest starlight, a jagged line that might be a hedge or something standing beside it. You move slowly, each foot feeling for the ground. The air is full of sounds you might not notice by day. The distant bark of a dog, the creak of wood as the wind leans against a roof, the soft rattle of something loose on a wall. You tell yourself as you move that these sounds have ordinary sources. Dogs bark, wood creaks, nails work loose. You repeat this like a chant. But behind each explanation, another possibility lingers. What if it is not just wind? What if that shadow is not just a tree? What if something is watching from just beyond where your eyes can reach? When you reach the place you must reach, perhaps the animal pen, you do your task quickly. You fumble with the latch, fingers clumsy in the cold, and murmur a prayer all the while. Not a formal one, just short phrases. Holy Mary, watch me. Saint Michael, guard me. Let me go back inside. You feel a little foolish, talking under your breath, but you keep doing it. The words make a thin wall between you and the dark. On your way back to the house, you glance up. The sky is patchy with clouds. In one gap, a star burns brighter than the others. For a moment, your fear loosens its grip enough for another thought to slip in. Perhaps someone is looking back, not from the hedges or the barn roof, but from that far, cold place. Perhaps the stories the priest tells about guardian angels are true. Perhaps you are not walking alone, even if the only footprints in the mud are yours. When you slip back inside and drop the bar into place, the relief is almost physical. Your shoulders lower, your chest loosens. The others look at you, just for a heartbeat, checking that you have returned unchanged, as if the night might have taken a piece of you or returned you with something clinging. You nod in a small, almost ritual way, and someone pokes the fire, making the embers glow a little brighter in welcome. Eventually, it is time to lie down. The straw rustles. Bodies settle close. The fire, though tended carefully, will not last till morning in its bright form. It will sink into a deeper, redder glow, leaving much of the cottage in shadow. The door bar is in place. The iron tongs are where they should be. The small charm is under the pillow or hung by the bed. The prayers have been said. You close your eyes, but sleep does not come at once. In the soft dark behind your eyelids, images gather. Faces of saints, faces of demons, faces of witches from stories. The ring of the moon you saw last week. the strange pattern of frost on the field that looked too much like a footprint. You have no control over which of these memories float to the surface. You can only watch them, as if watching a play you have seen too many times. Eventually, exhaustion pushes everything else aside. Your breathing slows. Your limbs grow heavy. You drift. In dreams, the boundaries are different. The priest would say this is a time when God can speak to you through visions, or when the devil can tempt you more easily. Old stories agree. They tell of people visited in sleep by creatures that steal their strength, of warnings that come in the form of strange paths and doors, of messages from the dead. You dream that you are walking the same path you walked tonight, but the ground is softer, as if made of ash. The houses are there, but their doors are missing, their windows gaping. The church tower rises up, but the bell is silent. At the edge of the path stands a figure whose face you cannot see clearly. You know with the bone-deep certainty dreams give you that if you walk past without speaking, something terrible will happen. You also know that if you speak, you might hear something you do not want to hear. When you wake, your heart is pounding. For a few seconds, you do not know which world you're in. The dim rectangle of the door, the low line of the hearth, the breathing of your family slowly reassemble themselves into reality. The dream fades, but not completely. It hangs at the edges of your morning like a web you have walked through. You tell no one at first. Dreams are slippery. Some are laughed off, others cling to you like burrs. Later, perhaps when you are alone with one trusted person, you might mention it in a low voice. They will listen, and then they will compare it to other dreams they have heard about. Perhaps they will decide it was nothing. Perhaps they will say it was a warning, a sign that you must do something. Go to confession, give alms, avoid a certain road at night. The priest, if he hears of it, will frame it in his own way. Perhaps he will say it is temptation and that you must not pay it heed. Perhaps he will say it is a call to deeper prayer. Either way, the dream will be folded into your larger map of meaning, filed in the space where faith, fear, and old tales overlap. You have always wondered, from the safe distance of another time, how people like you once managed to live in such fear of the dark. From inside this life, the question feels different. It is not so much, how did they live with such fear, as, how could they have lived without it? The night is not just absence of light. It is presence of everything you cannot see. Without stories to name those presences, without rituals to push them back even a little, the darkness would be unbearable. Faith gives you words to say when you feel watched. Prayers, psalms, invocations of saints. Fear gives those words urgency. Folklore fills in the gaps with creatures and patterns and rules. Do not look out the window after midnight. Do not answer if someone calls your name from beyond the door. Do not sleep with your feet pointed toward the road. None of these protections are perfect. People still sicken. Houses still catch fire. Men still vanish on the road. Children still see things in the corners of rooms that adults tell them not to talk about. But these layers of belief and caution provide, if nothing else, a sense that you are not entirely powerless, that there are things you can do, however small, to push back against the vast, unknowable dark. So each evening, as the light fades and the familiar tightening begins again, you do the same things. You latch the doors, you bank the fire, you set the iron in place, you speak the words. You listen to stories that frighten you and also soothe you. And when you finally lie down, heart beating a little faster than it does at noon, you trust that the world is not empty, that there are eyes on you that are not only hungry, hands reaching for you that are not only claws. And in the morning, when the bell rings and the gray light pushes against the shutter, you are always a little surprised to find yourself still here. The night survived once more. Your survival feels partly like grace, partly like luck. partly like the result of every charm and prayer you piled up around your fragile sleep. You do not try to separate those threads. You simply get up, stir the fire, and begin again.
You always think you know your fields until you walk them slowly, with your mind not on the soil or the weather, but on the stories that cling to them. Most days you put your head down and work. Today, as you step out into the light that follows a thin, washed-out sunrise, you feel the fields looking back at you. The ground is neither at its worst nor its best. You have seen it frozen hard enough to wring under your boots, seen it dust dry so that it crumbles under your fingers like old bread. Today it is somewhere in between, damp, slightly sticky, heavy enough that your shoes pick up an extra skin of mud. The air smells of earth and old water. Crows hop in the distance, stabbing their beaks into the ground as if searching for secrets. As you walk, your boots leave a line of prints across the furrows. You know these furrows well. You helped make them, pushing the plow behind the plodding ox, the muscles in your arms burning, your breath tearing at your throat. The path of the plow is straight because you kept your eyes on a point ahead and refused to look left or right until you reached it. That is what everyone says you must do. It is a simple, practical rule that also sounds like part of a sermon. Today, though, you are not guiding the plow. Today, you are planting. And planting is slower, more intimate. You carry a sack of seed against your hip. Each handful is light, but the sack as a whole is heavy, heavy with hope and with fear. You know exactly how much is in it, because you measured and counted and worried over it on the floor of your cottage, spreading the seeds out to make sure no handful included too much dust, too much broken husk. The priest says that every good gift comes from God. You believe him, or at least you try to. But when you run your fingers through the seeds now, what you feel is the work, the hours in the last harvest, the pain in your back, the hunger that pressed at you even as you carried sheaves. You feel the losses, too. The grain eaten by mice, the sacks spoiled by damp, the portion taken as rent and tithe. You reach the edge of your strip of land and stop. This is always where you stop. There is a routine here that has nothing to do with the priest's calendar and everything to do with the habits of those who have worked these same lines before you. You stand still for a moment, looking at the ground, at the furrows running like ribs into the distance. Your hand grips the sack. You feel the eyes of your ancestors on your back, though you would not put it that way aloud. You just feel that someone else has stood here like this many times, and you do not want to be the one to break the pattern. You bend down and touch the soil with your fingertips. It is cold and slightly slimy, but you press your hand flat against it anyway, as if greeting an old friend. Your lips move. The words that come out are not from the missal, not from any sermon. They are older than that, or younger, or simply from a different place. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you begin, because it feels wrong not to. But then other words follow. Words your mother used, and her mother, and the old man who taught her. Earth below, sky above. Take this seed and give it love. Keep the worm and rot away. Send enough sun and enough rain. What we plant, let us reap. What we sow, let us eat. It is clumsy. The rhyme limps. You do not say it for poetry. You say it because it feels like drawing a thin line of protection around your labor. You say it because in a world where so much slips through your fingers, it is one of the few moments when you can place your whole hand on the earth and pretend it is listening. If the priest heard you, he might smile tightly and tell you that the Holy Spirit, not the soil, is the one who listens. He might remind you that all blessings come from God alone. He might call this little verse superstition, a custom that smacks too much of the old pagan ways he preaches against. But the priest is not here. The field is. The field, and you, and the memories in your bones. You straighten up, the tendons in your back complaining. The sack shifts against your hip.
You step into the first furrow and begin the deliberate, repetitive work of planting. Hand into sack. Fingers curl around a measured pinch of seed. Arm swings forward. Fingers uncurl. Seeds patter down into the dark line. Footsteps. Repeat. There is a rhythm to it that is almost soothing. Your body falls into it easily, as if this exact movement has been programmed into your muscles. You could do it half asleep, and sometimes it feels like you are. Your mind, freed from needing to think about where your hands go, wanders. It wanders to sayings you have heard all your life. If you drop a seed, don't pick it up. God wanted it there. If you spill the sack, you'll spill your luck. Never sow on a Friday if you can help it. Christ died on a Friday, and the ground still remembers. You do not know how many of these sayings have any real meaning. The priest would argue that days are all alike in God's sight, that seeds do not fall according to human superstitions. But you have noticed over the years how people avoid certain things without even thinking about it. How they pause before starting a big task on what they call an unlucky day. How they look nervous if a crow calls 3 times in a row. You have also noticed how many of these little rules and stories are not really about the soil or the sky at all, but about people. Never refuse a beggar on the day you sow, someone once told you. Your field will know you are hard-hearted. It is a way of saying, be generous, at least when your life is going into the ground. If you joke about your neighbor's bad harvest, your own will fail, another proverb goes. That is a way of making people hold their tongues, of smoothing the sharp edges of envy. Out here, faith and fear and folklore are not separate things. They are ropes twisted together. One strand says, God controls the harvest. Another says, your neighbor's envy is dangerous. Another says, the land itself has moods and memories you must not anger. You hold all 3 in your hand when you open your fingers and let the seed fall. At the far edge of your strip, near where your field touches another's, you see a small bundle tied to a stick. It is nothing grand, just a scrap of cloth knotted around something you cannot see, fastened to a cut branch pushed into the soil so that it leans slightly over the furrows. You know what it is without needing to go closer. Someone has placed a charm there. You have seen many. Sometimes they are obvious, like this one. Sometimes they are hidden under stones or pressed into the cracks of boundary markers. They can be made of many things. A few grains of salt, a sprig of a certain herb, a pinch of ash, a snippet of hair. They can be meant to protect. They can also be meant to harm. You pause, seeds in your hand. The field on the other side of the boundary belongs to a neighbor you know well. You have shared tools and bread and news with them. You have also shared resentment, silent and mild most of the time, sharper at others. There was a quarrel once over where exactly the dividing line ran. Words were said that perhaps should not have been. Later, apologies were made, but some part of that quarrel stayed, buried under the politeness. Is this charm placed to guard their field from misfortune, from pests, from blight? Or is it placed to guard it from you, or to steal a little of your field's luck? The object itself does not answer. It swings slightly in the breeze, its tattered edge fluttering like a tongue refusing to speak. For a moment you feel anger prickle in your chest. How dare they, you think, as if you would curse their field, as if you could, as if your handful of seed and sore back and empty stomach were weapons anyone should fear. At the same time, another thought slips in. If they feel the need to protect their land, what have they heard? Who has been whispering? Has someone called you jealous? Called you grudging? Called you the kind of person who would throw a curse when your own rows come up thin? The impulse to march across the boundary and demand answers surges up and then ebbs. A field is not just soil. It is also the stories told over it. If you step onto their land accusing, the story that grows out of that step may be one you will have to live inside for years. You know how quickly tales of cursing spread. You think instead of your own habits.
You think of the times you have spat on your palm and traced a little cross in the dust before stepping onto your strip. Of the time you buried a coin at the corner of your field because someone said it would anchor your fortune there. If someone from another village saw you do that, they might think you were cursing, not praying.
So you move on. You tuck the site of the charm into the pocket in your mind where you keep such things, but you do not touch it. Touching charms is like touching another person's confession. You do not do it unless you are ready for whatever follows. As the day warms slightly, more people come out to their strips. The fields become a patchwork of bent backs and moving arms. Voices drift across the furrows, carrying scraps of talk from one to another. Some of it is ordinary. Complaints about aching joints, comments on the stubbornness of mules, jokes about how the children would rather do anything than pick stones from the soil. Some of it is less ordinary. Whispers about bad dreams, about someone's cow that died suddenly, about a family in the next village whose baby was born with a strange mark on its skin. These small stories spread like seeds on the wind. They land and take root in receptive minds. You feel them trying to take root in yours. Did you hear about the man who refused to lend his neighbor a measure of grain and then fell and broke his leg the next week? It was a curse, people say. Did you hear about the woman who always seemed to have more bread than anyone else, even in lean times? She made a pact, people murmur. You have no proof of any of it. You were not there. You did not see any words spoken, any spells cast. But you know how quickly suspicion grows, especially where envy has already sown some seeds. A weed does not need much soil. You remember a particular incident years ago when your own field did badly. The stalks that came up were thin and sickly, their heads small, the grains inside rattling weakly. You watched your neighbors bringing in thicker sheaves, their backs bent under loads you could only wish for. One night, sitting by the hearth, you muttered something bitter. You said that perhaps God liked them better, or that perhaps they had stolen your rain. It was meant to be half a joke, half a release of pressure, but your words had edge. Your mother, or perhaps someone older, gave you a sharp look. Mind your tongue, they said. The field hears. The field hears. You repeat now, under your breath, as you plant. It is not that you think the earth has ears. It is that you know every word you say may be picked up and repeated by someone else, carried back across the furrows, twisted a little, turned into evidence that you harbor malice. And malice, people say, is a kind of curse all on its own. At midday, when the bell from the village church reaches you faintly, long, slow notes barely distinct over the rustle of wind, you straighten up and rub your lower back. Some people pause to pray. Some simply pause. You do a bit of both. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the sweat cooling on your skin, and you speak quietly. Our Father, you begin. The words are familiar, worn smooth. As you reach the line about daily bread, your mind slips from the abstract to the very concrete crumbs in your cupboard. When you say, "Deliver us from evil," you think not only of devils with horns, but also of blights, of worms in grain, of frost at the wrong time, of tongues in the village that could ruin a name. When the prayer ends, you add in a few more words that are not in that prayer, but have found their way into your own daily litany. Keep away envy, keep away curses, keep away the eye that looks too long. The evil eye, some call it, the lingering look of someone who wants what you have and by wanting, somehow sours it. The priest might scoff at the idea that a look can rot a field, but you have lived long enough to see how often trouble begins with someone staring too long over a hedge. In the afternoon, as the sun shifts and your shadow lengthens along the furrows, you notice a figure standing at the far boundary of your land. They are not moving, not working, just standing with their hands clasped behind their back, watching. It is one of your neighbors. Not the one with the charm, but another you know. A man whose field often does slightly better than yours, whose house has a newer roof, whose clothes have fewer visible patches. He is not rich, but he is not as poor as you. His mouth is set in a line that could be concern,
could be calculation. He calls out a greeting, not unkind, but not warm either. You answer in kind. Your words float between you, light in sound but heavy with layers. How are your seeds? How is your family? How did your harvest go last year? Each question and answer probes gently for information, taking the measure of how likely you are to prosper or struggle this season.
There is a moment of silence, and in that moment, your worries whisper. Is he counting your furrows? Is he judging the quality of your seed? Is he nailing your success or failure before it even happens to some story he carries in his head? If your field does poorly, will he decide it is because of something you said or did? If it does well, will someone else decide it is because you stole their luck?
You remember then how quick people are to look for hidden causes when the usual ones, soil, weather, work, do not explain why one field thrives and another does not. Faith says God gives and takes away. Fear says someone helped him choose whom. Folklore supplies the missing link. Curses, blessings, charms, bargains. Later that week, you hear about a field on the far edge of the village that has failed. Seeds that never sprouted, soil that smells sour, plants that turn yellow almost as soon as they break the surface. People talk. They always talk. Some say it is the fault of the man who owns it, that he is lazy, that he waters at the wrong time, that he does not care properly for his tools. Some say it is a sign of God's disfavor because he failed to give proper tithe last year, or because he drinks too much, or because he does not come to Mass as often as he should. Others whisper that his land was cursed. They remember a quarrel he had with his brother over inheritance. They remember a woman he wronged years ago, whose eyes went hard and flat as she walked away. They remember the time he laughed too loudly when someone else's cart broke on the road. Words have weight, the old ones say. If you speak ill, it comes back. If someone curses you with their heart truly angry, it sticks. You have cursed in your life. Not in the way the priest means, perhaps, but in the way of this village, muttering under your breath, calling someone a thief when they pressed you too hard for rent, wishing on a cold, hungry night that your Lord might know what such a belly feels like. The words sank into the air. Maybe they vanished. Maybe they did not. Once, in a moment of deep anger, you looked at a man who had cheated you and thought, not said, but thought very clearly, I hope your field fails. It was a small, sharp wish that cut through your usual habits of politeness and caution. You did not light a candle to it or pin it to any charm. You simply let it flash across your mind like lightning. Later, his field did poorly. Not disastrously, but noticeably worse than usual. The moment you heard, your stomach dropped, as if you had stepped off a ledge you had not seen. You remembered your thought. You remembered how hot your anger had been. You wondered in a cold, sick way whether your anger had shape in the world beyond your ribs, whether it had run across the furrows like a shadow and sunk into his soil. The thought frightened you. It frightened you enough that you went to confession with your heart pounding, your words clotted on your tongue. You did not phrase it clearly. You did not say, I cursed my neighbor. You said, I wished him ill. You said, I had bad thoughts. The priest gave you penance to say and told you that God forgives those who repent. He did not say whether the world forgives too. Now, in the field, with the sack of seed compressing the skin on your hip and the wind pulling at your hair, you try to be careful with your thoughts. You try not to wish harm, even silently. You try not to imagine someone's bread going moldy or someone's cow going dry. It is not only because you fear God will judge you for such wishes. It is also because you fear the fields themselves and the stories people tell about what words can do. Still, the old habits cling. When you scrape your knuckles on a stone hidden in the soil, you mutter something sharp at the stone. When your foot twists in a rut and pain flares up your leg, you curse the rut, the road, the year. You are human, and your anger is quick. In quieter moments, when the sun is low and your shadow stretches out before you long and thin, you soothe the land in your mind.
You pat the soil gently with the flat of your hand after dropping seeds in. You hum old snatches of song you do not fully remember, little field songs that are half work chant, half lullaby, half spell. Grow straight, grow strong, little ones, you find yourself murmuring. We are tired. You must help us.
Do the plants hear?
Of course they do not. Not in any way that would satisfy the priest or a learned man with books. Yet you know that you work differently when you think of them as helpers rather than as indifferent stalks. You bend more carefully. You notice signs of disease sooner. You feel, in a strange way, less alone.
On certain days of the year, days the priest has marked as feasts, and days the old people mark for reasons they cannot fully explain, you and others perform small field rites that sit exactly at the point where faith and folklore clasp hands. On rogation days, when the priest leads a procession through the village and out to the boundaries of the parish, carrying the cross and chanting prayers, you walk with everyone else, trampling the path into the grass with your feet. He sprinkles holy water on the fields, on the hedges, on the landmarks that separate one man's land from another's. Children shout responses, their voices high and thin. You feel the weight of the cross's shadow moving across your strip. The priest prays for good weather, for protection from blight, for the fruitfulness of the earth. People mutter, Amen. But as the procession passes, you also see small private gestures. A man dips his own hand in the holy water and flicks it toward a particular corner of his field where the soil is poor. A woman quietly presses a handful of seeds into the soft earth at the base of a boundary stone, a double offering to God and to whatever might linger there. Later in the year, when harvest comes, there are other customs. The first sheaf cut from the field is sometimes treated with special care, tied with a different color of ribbon, carried home at the front of the line, placed near the hearth or hung by the doorway. It is a way of honoring the field, of saying thank you. It is also, in people's minds, a way of capturing the field's spirit for the winter, keeping some essence of growth inside the house to watch over them. The last sheaf is often treated differently, too. Sometimes it is left standing, a tuft of grain waving alone in a sea of stubble, as if to say to whatever invisible thing lives in the soil, "Here, we did not take everything. Stay. Do not follow us home." Sometimes it is cut and woven into a doll-like shape, tucked away until the next sowing, when it will be returned to the earth. The priest tolerates these things as long as they stay close enough to the church's own calendar and are dressed in enough Latin and holy water. He might even bless the first sheaf, if asked, his hand making the sign of the cross above something that in his mind is just plants and bread. But he frowns if he hears too many people speak of spirits in the grain or of field guardians. He fears, rightly from his perspective, that such talk drifts too close to worshiping the creation instead of the Creator. From where you stand, the line is less sharp. You do not bow to the last sheaf as if it were a god, but you nod to it quietly and feel a small quiver of unease if someone knocks it down without meaning to. It is difficult to live your whole life so close to the whims of soil and sky and not feel that the land has a personality, a temper, a memory. You have always wondered, from a distance, how peasants balanced such habits with their Christian faith. Inside the life, you see that there is no neat balance. There is a constant weaving and unweaving. One moment you are reciting the litany of the saints. The next, you are spitting over your shoulder, murmuring an old rhyme to ward off someone's envy. One moment, you are listening to the priest insist that all curses are empty before God. The next, you are carefully not saying something bitter out loud, just in case it does more than sour the air. This is how your days in the fields go. Seed and soil and sweat, wrapped in layers of words. Blessings spoken by priests and by neighbors. Curses muttered in anger and then swallowed. Charms tied to sticks and hidden under stones. Stories told at the hedgerow about fields that stayed green in drought because someone made the right offering at the right time. Stories told in the tavern about men whose harvests failed because they mocked a beggar or laughed in church. You cope with the relentless uncertainty of your work.
the way one storm can undo a year's labor, the way one pest can reduce a full granary to dust, by filling the spaces between cause and effect with meaning. God decides, you say, and also the land remembers, and also tongues have power. All three truths coexist, braided together, heavy in your hands, like a rope you grip to pull yourself through another season. At the end of the day, as the light thins and your shadow grows long across the newly seeded rows, you stand for a moment and look at what you have done. The field, to anyone else, would look like a series of lines in the dirt. To you, it looks like a book you have written in a language of small actions and smaller words. The pattern of your steps, the rhythm of your planting, the little prayer under your breath when you started, the way you did not answer harshly when a neighbor's jest cut too close, the way you did not look over your shoulder with envy when someone else's soil seemed richer. You make the sign of the cross, brushing your forehead, chest, shoulders with fingers still stained with earth. Lord, bless this, you say. Then, after a pause, more quietly, you add the older phrase, Land, do not hold my words against me. Then you turn and walk home. Behind you in the deepening dusk, the field lies silent, ready to do whatever fields do. In front of you lies the cottage, the fire, the stories that will be told tonight about whose fields look promising and whose do not, whose heart is clean and whose might be carrying a curse. You are tired, but you know you will listen to those stories closely. They are, in their own way, as important as the weather forecast would be in another age. You have always wondered how people like you manage to keep going, year after year, with so much out of their control. Out here, with seed dust on your skin and 100 small rituals pressing at your tongue, the answer feels simple, even if it is not comforting. You keep going by believing that nothing you do is entirely empty, that every word, every charm, every blessing, every cautious silence somehow weaves itself into the final shape of your harvest. Whether that is true or not on some grand scale does not matter as much as the way it lets you sleep. When you lie down at night after a day in the fields, you do not think only of the seed and the soil and the sun. You think of what you said and what you did not say, of the little rhyme you whispered at the edge of your land, of the saints you asked to look down. You think, I have done what I could, both with my hands and with my words. And in a life where so much is uncertain, that feeling that you have done what you could is sometimes the only shield you have. You notice the sickness before you admit it is sickness. At first, it is just tiredness, the kind everyone carries at the end of a hard season, a slower step, a longer pause at the threshold before bending to work, a breath that takes a little more effort. You tell yourself it is nothing. You have felt this way many times. You will feel this way again. But bodies carry their own stories, and this one begins to insist on being heard. Another cough, deeper now, shaking the whole chest, a hotness in the skin that the wind does not seem able to cool, a look in the eyes that is not just fatigue, but something like distance, as if the person you love is standing a few paces further away, even while sitting right beside you. You have lived with illness all your life. It is as much a part of the village as the well or the church. Children sicken suddenly and either recover or do not. Old people fade slowly, each winter carving away a little more flesh. Men injure themselves with tools and never quite mend. Women bleed too much in childbirth and come back pale and quieter, or do not come back at all. There is always a cough somewhere, always a limp, always someone with a rash or a fever or a pain in their side that has no clear name. Most of the time, you do not think of these things as exceptional. They are simply the way life is. The priest says that sickness entered the world with sin, and that your suffering is a sharing in Christ's. You understand this in the way you understand the seasons, not by argument, but by repetition. Pain comes, people say the words they have learned. Work continues as long as bodies can move. But sometimes illness gathers itself into something larger. It becomes not just an ache here and there, a fever in one bed, but a shadow that stretches from house to house. It begins perhaps like this, with one person coughing more than usual. Tonight, as you sit by the hearth, you hear that cough again. You turn your head. The fire throws enough light that you can see the sheen of sweat on their forehead, the way their hand presses against their ribs as if trying to hold something in place. The bowl in their lap is half full. They have not eaten much.
Are you cold? You ask, though the answer is obvious.
Hot and cold both, they say, voice rough. It burns, and then it bites. You reach out and touch their arm. The skin is hot, hotter than it should be. You draw your hand back as if you have brushed a kettle too near the coals. A small knot tightens in your stomach. You try to smooth your face before the others see it. There are things you can do. They are small, but they are what you have. You can lay a damp cloth on their forehead, feeling the heat seep into it, as if the fever is trying to escape. You can brew a weak tea from the herbs hanging in dried bundles near the roof. Yarrow, perhaps, or elderflower, or some other plant whose name you know more by taste than by any proper term. You can coax them to sip it, spoon by spoon, even when they grimace. You can pray. So you do. At first, your prayers are the plain ones you use for everything. Lord, help us. Holy Mary, watch over us. Saint so-and-so, protector of the sick, intercede. You cross yourself more often, fingers moving automatically to forehead, chest, shoulders. You touch the little wooden cross that hangs by the bed, the one that has seen many nights like this. There are other words, too. Words the priest does not teach, but that live in the mouths of older women and men who have spent their lives watching illnesses come and go. Fever up, fever down, leave this flesh and go to ground. You mutter under your breath as you change the cloth again. Heat in the fire, not in the blood. You know these phrases are not proper prayer, not really, but you say them anyway, just as you would place a piece of iron by the bed to draw the sickness out. Because doing nothing feels worse than doing something imperfect. The night lengthens. The fire sinks and is coaxed back. The sick person dozes, waking with small jerks, eyes glassy and confused. Their breath rattles now and then. At one point they reach out, blindly, fingers groping until they find your sleeve. You take their hand. It is both hot and trembling.
You're here?
They whisper.
I'm here.
You answer. Sleep. It will be better in the morning. You are not sure you believe that last sentence, but it is the one that comes. You remember being comforted by similar words when you were ill as a child, when your mother sat where you sit now, her face carved by worry in the same way. You do not recall whether the morning really was better those times, or whether it was only the fact that you had made it through the night that mattered. The bell rings at dawn, as it always does. The sound feels different, though nothing in its rhythm has changed. It comes to you through a haze of tiredness. Your eyes burn, your muscles ache from holding the same positions for too long. The sick person's breathing has settled into a shallow but more regular pattern. The fever is not broken. You had hoped it might. You shuffle through the morning tasks clumsily. The fire must still be fed, the animals still tended, the bread still divided. Work does not stop because one person cannot rise. It rarely stops for anything short of death, and sometimes not even then. You tell yourself that this might be like the other fevers you have seen. A few days of heat and sweat and delirium, then a slow return to something like health. You cling to that thought while your hands move. But somewhere deeper, another voice whispers that this feels different. It is not only your loved one who seems unwell. Others in the village have been coughing more. You notice how many people wipe their noses on their sleeves, how many eyes look dull, how many remarks along the lane begin with, "I don't feel quite right," and end with a forced laugh. By midday, word is going around that 3 people in another hamlet not far from yours have taken to their beds. One is said to be covered in swellings. Another cannot keep anything down.
The third speaks nonsense as if devils sit on his chest. These reports reach you in bits and pieces, carried by someone who passed through or by someone who spoke with someone who knows someone there. Each retelling adds a little color, a little emphasis. Illness spreads in two ways, through bodies and through stories. Fear begins to move more quickly than any sickness. You see it in the way people pull their cloaks tighter around themselves, as if cloth could protect against what rides on breath. You see it in the way they stand a little farther apart when speaking, though they do not say why. You see it in the way eyes flick toward the church tower more often than usual, as if checking to make sure it is still there, as if expecting the bell to ring in some new, terrible pattern everyone will immediately recognize. The priest calls for special prayers. On the next Sunday, the church is fuller than usual, packed with bodies giving off the sour smell of worry. He speaks in a voice that tries to be steady. He mentions pestilence, not as something distant in stories of other places, but as a possibility here. He reminds everyone that life is a breath, that the soul must be ready to stand before God at any time. He urges confession. You have confessed many times before, kneeling in the small, cold space near the altar, whispering your sins into the priest's ear while he listens and then murmurs absolution. It is always a little frightening, always a little relieving. Now, under the weight of sickness pressing at the village walls, it feels more urgent. You find yourself in the line waiting to kneel. You think of all the things you could say, sharp words, bitter thoughts, small dishonesties, larger ones. You cannot tell where to draw the line. When your turn comes, you kneel and speak. Your voice is low. The priest's ear bends toward you. You confess something half-remembered from years ago, something you had not thought of for a long time, but that now rises up as if pulled by a hook. A moment when you wished someone dead in a flash of anger. A time when you failed to visit a sick neighbor because you were tired and did not want to catch what they had. You do not know if these things matter in the strict tally of sin, but they matter to you now, with breath itself feeling less certain. The priest gives you penance, prayers to say, actions to perform, and speaks words of forgiveness. You leave the confessional feeling lighter in one way and heavier in another. If sickness comes for you, at least you have tried to straighten your soul. If it comes for others, you will have to ask again why, even if the official answer is always God's will. Back at home, the fever is worse. The cough tears more harshly. The person you love drinks little, eats less. Their eyes drift, sliding away from you as if your face is difficult to hold in focus. They mutter names in their sleep. Some you recognize, some you do not. At times, they reach up towards something only they can see. You try more remedies. You send for the woman who knows herbs better than anyone. The priest disapproves of her sometimes, muttering about charms and superstitions. But he has also taken her potions when his own stomach turned. She arrives with a basket that smells of crushed leaves and bitter roots. She lays a hand on the sick person's forehead, then on their chest, listening with her palm as much as with her ear. She shakes a little powder into a cup, mixes it with water, holds it to cracked lips. She instructs you to bathe the feet in warm water, to change the linens more often, to open the shutter briefly each morning to let the old air out. She suggests a small gesture over the bed, a sign traced 3 times with her finger in the air, accompanied by words you do not catch fully. You are not sure if those words are a prayer, a charm, or both. You let her speak them. You cannot afford to refuse any help. At the same time, you ask the priest to come and bless the house. He arrives with a small flask of holy water and a book. He sprinkles the bed, the door, the hearth, his lips moving in Latin. He places a crucifix more prominently on the wall. He tells the sick person that suffering can purify the soul, that Christ knows what it is to hurt, that nothing is wasted in God's accounting. He also tells you to be wary of unapproved remedies, to trust more in sacraments than in strange mutterings. You nod because it is easier than explaining that you do both because you cannot bear to do only one.
Days blur. The line between day and night frays.
You measure time not by the bell alone, but by the pattern of symptoms. When did the fever rise? When did it fall a little? When did the rash appear? Did the cough sound better in the morning or worse? You learn the feel of a forehead with your palm as surely as you know the feel of earth with your hand. Outside your door, the sickness coils itself through the village. You hear of another child taken to their bed, an old man who took to his straw and did not get up again. A woman who lost her strength so quickly she could not stand without someone's arm under her. The graveyard near the church, already crowded, begins to receive more visitors.
The bell rings differently when someone dies.
You have known this pattern since childhood. There is a certain number of strokes for a man, a slightly different one for a woman, for a child. The sound carries across fields, across lanes, over roofs. People stop what they are doing for a moment when they hear it. They count without knowing they are counting. They wonder who it is. Now the bell rings in that pattern more often. One day twice, another 3 times. Its voice becomes the soundtrack of the week, weaving itself through the clatter of work. Each time, you feel a small jolt in your chest, a mixture of sorrow and selfish relief when the name is not one you love. Each time a whisper. Next time, it could be. People search for reasons. They cannot help it. When a sickness takes one person and spares another, they look for points of difference. Did the sick one fail in some duty? Did they anger someone who might have cursed them? Did they walk on a night they should have stayed home? Did they skip a feast day mass? Did they eat something suspicious from a stranger's hand? Some blame the air itself. Bad air, they say, nodding wisely, though none can see it. They talk of smells, of mists rising from the marsh, of wind from the wrong direction. Others talk of the alignment of stars, though few know what that alignment truly is. They only repeat what they have heard in taverns, from travelers, from the occasional wandering scholar. Others look for more specific culprits. The old woman with the sharp tongue who lives alone. The family that never seems to get sick, whose relative works in the Lord's house and perhaps has access to better food. The stranger who arrived a month ago and never quite explains why they came. You feel the village tilt slightly toward suspicion. It is not yet open accusation, but the weight is shifting. Voices lower when certain names are mentioned. People cross themselves more quickly when they pass certain doors. Children are told, quietly but firmly, not to visit certain houses. The priest tries to hold the line. He preaches against blaming your neighbor. He insists that sickness is sent to test and to purify, not necessarily as punishment for specific deeds. He warns that hunting for witches and scapegoats can itself be sinful. But he also speaks more often now of God's wrath against sin in general, of the need for repentance, of judgment. His words carry comfort and threat in equal measure. You stand in church and listen, your eyes drawn repeatedly to the small wooden statue of a saint who is said to have survived plague by prayer and fasting. You wonder what that survival looked like. You wonder how many around him died anyway. One evening, when the sick person's breath is so shallow you find yourself holding your own in unconscious imitation, someone knocks at your door. You jump. The knock is soft but insistent. It is your neighbor, face pale and pinched. They stand in the threshold, cloak damp with mist, hands twisting in front of them. "Will you come?" they ask. "My wife, she is very bad. I need someone, anyone." You hesitate, just for a heartbeat. The fear is reflexive. To go into another house where the sickness is strong is to step closer to it yourself, to breathe the same air, to touch the same linens, to hear the same rattling cough. Then you look back at the bed where the person you love lies. You think of the times others have come to you, to bring herbs, to help lift a body, to sit and share the long watches of the night. You know what it feels like when someone steps through your door in such a moment. It is like the fire flaring a little higher, like a beam being laid under a sagging roof.
I'll come, you say. Inside your neighbor's cottage, the air is thick and humid, as if the fever itself has made the room sweat. The woman on the bed is flushed and restless, hands clawing at the blanket. Her eyes open now and then, unfocused. She whispers fragments of prayers, of lullabies, of nonsense. The child sitting in the corner looks at you with wide eyes, as if you might be able to fix everything by simply being there. You cannot. You know that. But you can fetch water. You can wring out cloths. You can wipe a brow, hold a hand, speak softly. You can say the familiar words, "Holy Mary, pray for us now and at the hour of our death." You can say, "You're not alone," even when you suspect that, in the final moment, everyone is. As you move through these tasks, you notice objects placed around the bed. A small piece of cloth pinned to the pillow, perhaps something that touched a relic once. A sprig of herb tied with a red thread above the headboard. A folded scrap of parchment tucked under the straw mattress, ink faintly visible. Each is a gesture, a hedge of small defenses against something vast. You feel no urge to move them. You feel instead a sense of recognition. Your own bed looks much the same. Crosses and charms, saints and symbols, holy water and home remedies. It is not that you cannot tell the difference between them in your head. It is that here, in the heat and the stink and the low moans of the sick, you do not want to tell the difference. You want all of them. The woman dies 2 days later. The bell rings, slow and heavy. You stand outside for a moment and listen, counting the strokes. Your fingers tighten on the edge of your apron. You remember her singing at harvest, laughing in the lane, scolding her children for not washing their hands. It feels impossible that she is now part of the earth, a name on a list in the priest's book, a body under a mound of freshly turned soil. You attend the funeral. Almost everyone does. The coffin is simple, the wood rough. 6 men carry it on their shoulders, moving in slow, uneven steps. The child walks behind, holding someone's hand so tightly their knuckles bleach. You walk behind them, close enough to see the mud on their shoes, the way their shoulders shake without sound. In the church, the candles burn, the priest speaks, the incense curls in the air. The words are familiar, about returning to dust, about the promise of resurrection, about a God who counts every hair on your head. You say the responses you have always said. You cross yourself at the usual times, and yet, beneath the comfort of the ritual, questions coil. Why her and not you? Why now and not later? Is this a punishment, or simply a piece of some pattern too big for you to see? If you had given more alms, said your prayers more fervently, gone on more pilgrimages, would it have been different? If she had not hung that charm, if she had trusted only in sacraments, would the outcome have changed? No answer comes. The priest's words drift like smoke, beautiful, fragile, dispersing quickly. You file out of the church with the others, walk to the graveyard, watch as the coffin is lowered. The earth thuds on the wood. The sound is dull and final. When you go home, the person you love is still alive. Their fever is broken a little. Their eyes are clearer. They are very weak, but when you help them drink, they manage a small smile. Relief floods you, so suddenly it makes you dizzy. You feel in that moment as if the world has tilted slightly back toward balance. You thank God. You thank the saint whose name you whispered. You thank the herbs, the woman who brewed them, the priest who blessed the house, the charm by the bed, the little bone in the reliquary miles away that you once touched. You thank them all, even though you know it cannot have been all of them. Or perhaps it was. Perhaps every small act you piled up, every mile walked, every prayer muttered, every bitter thought swallowed instead of spoken, built a wall just high enough to keep death on the other side this time. You have always wondered, from a cleaner distance, how people in your place found meaning in the face of plague and illness.
From within it, the question is not abstract. It is as close as your own skin. If you believe that sickness is random, meaningless, a cruel roll of some distant dice, it becomes hard to stand up in the morning. If you believe that every fever, every cough, every funeral is directly and neatly tied to specific sins, it becomes hard not to hate yourself or your neighbor. So you find, as so many like you have found, a rough path between those two cliffs. You say that God sees everything and will, in the end, make sense of what now seems senseless. You say that your suffering can be joined to Christ's, that it can purify you. You say that saints listen and sometimes help. You say that certain herbs ease certain pains, that certain charms cannot hurt. You say that envy and curses are dangerous, that kindness and alms are shield and salve. You live in a web of explanations. Some of them contradict each other if you stare at them too hard. Most days, you do not. Most days, you pull whichever thread is closest to hand and use it to haul yourself a little further along the road. When night comes and you lie down beside the person whose breath has steadied, you are acutely aware that neither of you is guaranteed another dawn. You always knew that, but sickness has written it in larger letters across your mind. You close your eyes and say your prayers. For the woman who died, for a child, for your own household, for all those who are already coughing in villages you will never see. You ask that God's mercy be larger than your fear, larger than your confusion, larger than the small, clumsy bargains you have tried to make. You ask, too, in a quieter part of your heart, that whatever stories people tell about this sickness will be kind, will not twist you or anyone else into villains for the sake of making sense of what cannot truly be understood. Then you let sleep come, heavy and imperfect, full of half-remembered sermons and fragments of old tales about plagues that walked like men and saints who stood in their path. You do not know which images are true, which are superstition, which are simply the mind's way of trying to survive in a world where a cough in the night can change everything. You only know that, for one more night, you are still here to dream them. And in the morning, when the bell rings and the light pushes at the shutter, you will wake again into a life shaped by faith, fear, and folklore. And you will keep living it, because that, more than any theory, is what people like you have always done. You do not notice when the year begins to bend toward celebration until you hear it in people's voices. It is not the work that changes first. The work is almost the same. Hands in soil, breath in cold air, aching backs and sore feet. It is the way people talk while they work that shifts, a little at a time, like the turning of the sun. At first, it is only small things. Someone mentions, in the middle of complaining about the weather, that by the time St. John's Day comes, it will be warmer. Someone else, while counting how many sacks of grain are left, adds, "We'll need enough for Easter bread." These words are like markers on a road you have traveled many times, but still forget until you see them again. The church says the year turns on holy days. The priest has a book where all the feasts are written. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Ascension, Pentecost, the long green weeks after. Saints' days, too, strung through like beads. Days when certain names are spoken more often, when certain stories are told. From the pulpit he points toward heaven, but he also points toward the calendar, reminding you that time itself belongs to God. The village says the year turns on other days as well, though it does not always name them the same way. There is the day when you first hear the frogs in the marsh at night, the day when the first swallow is seen, the day when the last sheaf is cut, the first apple falls, the first frost rims the puddles. These days have their own stories, their own small rituals. Sometimes church and village days are the same. Sometimes they sit on top of one another like two hands clasped, knuckles not always aligning. You live in the space between those clasped fingers. This time the turning comes as winter begins to loosen, but before it releases its grip fully. The mornings are still sharp with frost.
Your breath still hangs in front of you when you step outside. There is still not enough food. Yet the priest starts to speak of Lent from the pulpit, of fasting and confession and preparation. And in the same breath, almost, he speaks of the feast that will come at the end, Easter, the great joy after the long, lean days.
In the weeks before the fasting, there is another kind of day. The priest calls it carnival time, though he does not say the word with much warmth.
A season of excess, he warns. Do not fall into sin. People call it other things. Shrovetide, pancake days, the fat days when whatever is left that cannot be kept through Lent is cooked and eaten.
You feel it in the village before you name it.
People talk more loudly in the evenings. There is more laughter in the tavern, even if the mugs hold no more ale than usual. The children run faster, bolder, as if sensing that something is coming that will let everyone loosen their belts a little. Not their belts around their bellies, those stay tight, but the belts around their thoughts, their words, their movements.
On one of these days, your work in the field ends a little earlier.
It is not that the earth needs you less, it never does. It is that the light lingers a heartbeat longer, and there is a sense, as fragile as a soap bubble, that for once your time might belong not just to toil and fear, but to something almost like joy. You go home, wash in a bowl where the water has to be warmed carefully because you cannot waste wood. You scrub the dirt from under your nails, splash your face, run wet fingers through your hair. You change your tunic for the least patched one, the one you keep for Sundays and funerals and rare days when you might be seen by more eyes than usual.
Are you going?
Someone asks, though they know the answer.
Yes?
You say.
Are you?
They shrug, but their hands move faster, tying their belt.
We'll see.
The feast, or whatever you want to call it, gathers first in the space near the church, because that is where there is room and where the priest can keep an eye on things. People drift there in twos and threes, called by nothing more formal than the knowledge that this is what one does now, this time of year, when the priest has started talking about repentance, but has not yet demanded full fasting. There is food, of a sort. Not abundance, not the tables groaning under roasts and pies that you sometimes hear about in tales of great lords. But there are small, precious additions to the usual thin fare. Bits of meat saved for this, strips of fat, pancakes made from flour and eggs, and whatever milk is left that will not keep. Someone has somehow produced a small wheel of cheese. Someone else has a jar of honey, guarded carefully but shared in thin drizzles that shine like liquid sunlight on bread. You take a piece of something offered to you, bread with a smear of fat perhaps, or a pancake folded in half. It is not large. You eat slowly, letting your tongue linger on the taste, remembering that in a few days such richness will be set aside, replaced by plainer things as Lent begins.
The priest walks among you, his face worn but watchful.
He does not forbid the food. He knows what it means to people who have spent months stretching thin stores. But he speaks now and then. Remember moderation. Remember that Lent is coming. Do not turn joy into a sin. Joy is a dangerous thing, you think, the way he says it. It feels like fire, good for warmth, for cooking, for light, but so quick to jump its place, so eager to reach up the walls and take the roof. You have heard him tell stories of feasts that turned to brawls, of drinking that led to fighting, of dancing that led to betting, and then to children conceived in shame. You know those stories are meant as warnings. You also know that some of them are true, and that people still remember the laughter as well as the consequences. Music starts, thin at first, then gathering. Someone has a pipe. Someone else has a drum, a skin stretched over a frame that thumps when struck. The fiddler appears, as if called by the sound, bow in hand. The notes spiral into the air, simple patterns you could hum in your sleep. Children begin to move to the music first, their limbs loose and unself-conscious. They jump, spin, wave their arms. Their laughter is a bright, sharp sound that cuts through the rawness of the wind. Then older ones join, teenagers testing the edges of their bodies, seeing how far their knees bend, how high their feet can rise.
Eventually, even some of the adults step into the open space, hands on one another's shoulders, feet pounding the frozen earth in rough, looping steps.
You watch for a while and then let someone pull you in. Your feet know the dance better than your mind does. It is a pattern you have traced in other years, on other days when work was set aside for an hour. You step, hop, turn, your hand warm on the cloth over someone's shoulder, someone else's grip firm around your own. For a few moments, the pounding of your heart is not from fear or from dragging a plow. It is from movement chosen, from the strange luxury of letting energy flow out, not toward a task, but toward nothing in particular. You feel your lungs fill with cold air, and your body answer a rhythm that has nothing to do with bells or orders. And yet, even here, fear stands at the edge of the circle. You see it in the glances people cast toward the priest, making sure he is not frowning too deeply. You see it in the way hands drop suddenly if they stray too far from proper places, in the way someone pulls back from a joke that cuts too near the bone. At the edges of the gathering, other things are happening. Boys and young men put on masks made of leather or cloth, with long noses or snarling mouths. They drape themselves in old furs or rags, turning themselves into animal shapes, bears, wolves, creatures with horns. They chase children in play, roar and caper, shake sticks with ribbons attached. The children shriek and scatter, then creep back in. You have heard the priest speak against such masquerades. The devil wears masks, he warns. Do not play at what is evil. He says that such animal dances come from older times, from people who worshipped things that were not God. Sometimes he tries to ban them. Sometimes he looks away if they do not go on too long. From your place in the dance, you see both truth and need in what he says. The masks are unsettling. For a heartbeat, when someone in a wolf's head lurches toward you, you feel a spike of real fear, as if something wild has slipped free. But you also see the joy in the boy's eyes behind the holes, the way he revels in the chance to be something other than himself for an hour. In a life where so much is fixed, your birth, your place, your work, wearing another face for a moment is a kind of freedom. As the light begins to fade, the mood shifts again. Someone brings out a large wooden figure, crudely carved, man-shaped, stuffed with straw. It has a painted face already flaking. Some call it winter, others call it the old year, or give it a name that belongs to no one you know. You have seen this figure before, many times. You have helped carry it to the edge of the village where the fields begin, where the road runs out. You know what will happen to it. The priest stands at the church door, watching. Sometimes he speaks a few words about leaving sin behind, about putting to death your old ways. Sometimes he does not say much, letting the people do what they have always done. This time he walks with you part of the way, then stops. You and others shoulder the wooden figure and carry it, stumbling a little under its awkward weight. Children trot alongside, shouting. Someone starts a chant, half prayer, half jeer. Out with winter, out with harm, out with hunger, out with harm. The words do not scan neatly, but the meaning is clear. At a ditch or a stream, you throw the figure in. Or you set it up and set it on fire, watching the flames lick up the painted face, watching the straw collapse into glowing black. Smoke rises, carrying with it a strange sense of relief. You know that burning a wooden dummy does not really change the weather. You know that sickness and war and famine do not vanish because straw has turned to ash. And yet, standing there in the raw wind, watching a man's shape burn, you feel as if you have done something to push back against all that presses on you. On the way back, people are quieter. The wildness of the masks, the pounding of the dance, the swallowing of rich scraps of food all settle into a kind of thoughtful tiredness. You know that Lent is near. That time when you will be asked to fast more strictly, to confess more thoroughly, to recall your own mortality in words and ashes. You have seen people receive ashes on their foreheads on Ash Wednesday, the priest tracing a cross and murmuring, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." You have felt the grit on your own skin, the strange mixture of humiliation and relief in being told, so plainly, what you are. Between the burning of the dummy and the smear of ashes, something in you shifts. One moment you watched a straw man go to flame and felt that you were driving away misfortune. The next, you will be told that misfortune sits inside you, too, in your flesh, in your desires, in your stubbornness. The world is not only filled with dangers that come from outside, it is filled with dangers that rise from your own heart. Weeks later, when the long gray string of Lenten days has worn you thin in body and mind, less food, more prayer, more talk of sin, you begin to feel another change. Whispers of Easter creep into the cold air. You hear it in the way people talk about eggs. Eggs have been fewer on the table during Lent, sometimes saved, sometimes given up. Now they are counted differently, eyes brightening at the thought of bright shells gathered in baskets for painting or for cooking. You hear it in the way housewives and mothers discuss flour and honey and spices. If we can spare enough, they say, if the last of the stores hold. The priest's voice changes too. In the early weeks of Lent, his sermons pressed hard on guilt, on the need for repentance, on hell and judgment. As Easter nears, he speaks more often of hope, of Christ rising, of graves that will one day open, of light returning after darkness. From the outside, these changes might look neat, like the turning of pages in a book. From where you live, they feel more ragged. You are tired from fasting, from longer services, from extra prayers added to an already crowded day. Your body is ready for the feast before your mind is ready for the idea of joy. The night before Easter, you go to the church in darkness. It is strange to walk there at an hour when you would usually be asleep or half dreaming on your straw. The village is quiet, save for the soft slap of your feet, the murmur of others moving toward the same point. The sky above is deep and star-pricked. The air has a different cold, a cleaner one, less heavy than in deep winter. Inside the church, no candles burn at first. The darkness is almost complete. You stand with others in that thick shadow, hearing the rustle of clothes, the clearing of throats, the small shuffling of feet. You smell stone and wax and bodies. The absence of light feels like a presence, like something solid you could lean against. Then, at the back, a small flame is struck. It is tiny, just a spark catching on tinder, a brief flare. It grows as it finds the wick of the paschal candle, that tall pillar of wax the priest has prepared. Fire climbs it, hesitant and then firm. The priest lifts the candle. Lumen Christi, he sings, the light of Christ.
Deo gratias,
The people answer. Thanks be to God. The light moves forward, carried slowly. The shadows shift and retreat. From that one flame, smaller candles are lit, passed from hands to hand. You receive one. Your fingers are clumsy, your hands cold. But when the wick finally catches and your own small candle burns, you feel as if your chest has opened to make room for it. Faces emerge around you, carved by the flickering light. Tired faces, lined faces, faces that have cried more than once this year. For a moment, they all look a little different, as if some other story is being written on them besides hunger and worry. The priest speaks of resurrection in words that are grander than anything you could invent. He speaks of death conquered, of the grave emptied, of sins forgiven. You do not understand it all. You do not need to. You feel the way the tone of his voice rises and falls with a joy that seems too bright for such a dark hour. After the service, there is food. Not for everyone in abundance, never that, but more than usual and better. Families bring what they have: eggs, cheese, bread made from flour that might otherwise have stretched further if used more carefully, a bit of meat, a jar of something sweet. You eat with hunger sharpened by weeks of less. The first bit of rich food almost hurts your mouth with its strangeness. You chew slowly, feeling the fat coat your tongue, the sugar prickle at your teeth.
For a brief hour, the worries about next week's meals fall a step back. Children run outside in the pale first light,
Searching for eggs hidden in corners of the churchyard, in the low hedges, behind stones. Some of these eggs are simply set aside. Others have been dyed with onion skins or herbs, their shells stained yellow or green. The children squeal in delight at each discovery, as if a miracle has occurred in the gap between grass and stone. You watch them, smiling despite yourself. There is a story in their movement, too. A story of life hidden and then found, of the earth giving up something that looks dead and hard but holds newness inside. You are not sure whether you think about it that way as you watch, or whether you simply feel a warmth in seeing children's hands full instead of empty. Later in the year, there is another kind of feast, one not tied to Christ's rising, but to the rising and falling of the crops. Harvest. It is different every year. Sometimes the fields give much, and the feast feels like a sigh of relief. Sometimes they give little, and the feast is more an act of defiance than of celebration. This year, imagine it is somewhere in the middle, enough to keep you alive, not enough to banish worry. The reaping itself is grueling. Day after day of cutting, binding, stacking. The sun beats down. You sweat through your clothes. Your hands blister even though they have done this before. Fear walks in the fields with you. Fear of a storm that might come before you finish. Fear of a fire that could take it all. Fear of sickness that might fall on you or the beasts and halt the work. And yet, when the last sheaf finally falls, tied and gathered, a different feeling moves through the workers like a wind. People straighten, wiping their foreheads, looking at the stubbled fields with something like astonishment. You have done it again. You have pulled food from the ground. There must be a mark put on this moment. You cannot let it pass as if it were nothing. The priest organizes a mass of thanksgiving. He stands at the altar in vestments more colorful than usual, perhaps with embroidered vines or wheat stalks on the cloth. A sheaf of the new grain is placed near the altar, decorated with a ribbon. Prayers are said. Incense rises, smelling sweeter than the sweat that has soaked your shirt. Afterward, in the village, there is a feast. Not as sumptuous as the stories in noble halls, but generous by your standards. Bread made from new grain, ale brewed from last year's barley but drunk with a lighter heart. Maybe a pig is slaughtered, its meat roasted, its fat dripping onto coals. You sit on a bench fashioned from planks and logs, bowl in hand, and watch the movement around you. People laugh more easily now, their mouths freed from the tight lines hunger draws. Someone starts a song about harvest, verses about cutting and binding, about backs and blades, about the way the field looks when the last sheaf is in. Others join, voices rough but willing. There is dancing again, this time less cautious. Children weave between adults, their feet kicking up dust. The sun sinks slowly, painting the world in a warm, deep gold that makes even worn clothes look richer. And still, in the middle of the joy, fear sits quietly. You hear it in the way someone says, "May next year be as good," and someone else answers, "Or better," and a third murmurs, "If God wills." You see it in the way a woman, laughing as she drinks, pauses to cross herself when someone mentions the winter ahead. The feast is not only about what you have, it is also about what you know you could lose. It is a way of saying, we are alive now. We have this food now. We do not know about tomorrow, but tonight we will eat as if we were not always waiting for the next blow. You have always wondered, from the outside, how peasants balanced joy and fear, feast and famine, celebration and sorrow. From inside, you see that they never stopped balancing. The scale is always moving. On feast days, you pile what you can on the side of joy. Bread, dance, song, colored eggs, burning dummies, masks, processions, candles in the night. On other days, fear adds its own weight. War rumors, empty grain bins, sickness, the memory of graves. Faith threads through it all. Faith that holy days are not just excuses for noise and eating, but glimpses of another world where hunger and worry do not rule. Faith that God delights in your laughter as well as your prayers, so long as neither leads you too far from Him. Faith that saints smile to see their days marked with bells and processions, even if people mix in older customs the priest does not love. Folklore threads through it too. Old songs, old dances, old customs with roots no one can see clearly anymore. Burning winter in effigy, hanging greenery over doors, rolling wheels of fire down hills at midsummer, children wearing crowns of flowers, men wearing antlers, women whispering small wishes as they tie ribbons to branches. You live your life between these threads, wrapped in them like in a cloak that is patched and worn, but still keeps out the cold better than bare skin. When, at the end of a long feast day, you finally go home, legs sore from dancing, stomach fuller than usual, heart oddly light, you know that tomorrow the same worries will be waiting. The fields will still need you. The debts will still be counted. The sick will still groan. But for one day, the village has stepped into a different rhythm. Bells rang not only for warnings but for joy. Candles were lit, not only beside beds of the dying, but in dark churches full of songs. People moved not only under the weight of sacks and tools, but in patterns that made no sense, except that they made you remember you were alive. You lie down on your straw and listen to the muffled sounds of the village settling. Distant laughter, a dog barking, a snatch of song trailing off. Your muscles throb, your eyes are heavy, your mind replays small moments. The sight of candles moving in darkness, the taste of sweet bread, the feel of another hand gripping yours in a circle of dance. Somewhere in the space before sleep, you think that maybe this is another way faith, fear, and folklore keep you going. Not only by warning and explaining and threatening, but by giving you days when, for a brief time, you feel that the weight you carry is shared by something larger. By God, by saints, by the dead you remember, by the stories older than the church itself. You do not untangle it. You simply drift off, with a faint feeling that even in your small life of hunger and worry, there are moments of light held up against the dark like candles at Easter, fragile, flickering, but real. And in the morning, when the bell rings again and calls you back to work, you will answer it, carrying in your bones the memory of the feast like a small warmth that takes longer than the bread to be used up. You do not notice, at first, that you have become one of the old ones. You still wake to the bell, still feel the same stiffness in your back, still step into your boots and onto the same earth. The lane looks the way it has always looked, muddy when it rains, dusty when it does not. The church stands where it has always stood. The fields lie where they have always lain, striped and patient. But there is a day, somewhere in the middle of an ordinary week, when you reach for something and your hand is slower than you expect it to be. Or you straighten up from lifting a bundle and the pain that rises along your spine is sharp enough to steal your breath for a second. Or you hear your own voice telling a story and realize, with a small shock, that you sound exactly like someone who has been dead for years. You are that someone now, for other people. The children look at you with the same mixture of impatience and awe you once felt for your grandparents. Your words carry more weight than they used to, not because they have changed, but because fewer people remember things that happened before you. The past has started to pile up behind you instead of in front. Life does not stop while you notice this. The day still demands its due. You pull on your cloak, the same one that has been mended so many times its original shape is hard to see. You step out into air that smells of damp earth and old smoke. You walk past the same cottages, their walls patched and repatched, their roofs still shedding straw in thin drifts whenever the wind rises. Along the lane, children play with a hoop made from a broken barrel, rolling it with sticks. They shout and run, their feet bare, their knees scratched. As you pass, you hear one of them hiss a warning in a voice deliberately low and spooky.
Don't step on the crack in the path, or the spirits will take your toes.
The others shriek and hop over the cracks, laughing and pretending to be afraid. You smile, despite yourself. You said the same thing once. You believed it half and doubted it half, which is how most belief works when you are young. You pause and watch them for a moment. One of the children glances up and catches your eye.
Is it true?
She asks, suddenly serious.
About the cracks?
You could say no. Not like that. You could explain that cracks are just where the ground dries and splits, that no hand will rise to grab a careless ankle. You could repeat the priest's words about fearing God more than shadows. Instead, you find yourself saying, if you don't want bad luck, watch where you put your feet. It is not an answer, not really. It is a piece of advice dressed up in an old tale. The girl nods, as if you have given her something very wise. The other children repeat your words, adjusting them, already turning them into something that will be said again long after you are gone. Inside your cottage, the air is thick with the smell of cooking. Thin cabbage, a scrap of meat, a handful of peas. The pot hangs over the fire, steam curling up to blacken the beams even more. Someone sits by the hearth, mending a shirt. Another person grinds grain by hand. The sound a slow, heavy scrape. You sit down on your usual stool, fingers whirring at the edge of the table. On the wall near you hangs a small collection of objects. A wooden cross, darkened by years of touched fingers. A scrap of cloth in a little bag that once brushed a saint's bone. A sprig of something, dried and brittle, that used to be green and powerful in someone's mind. You remember where each piece came from. The cross was carved by your father. The cloth was carried back by your own hands from the relic you visited. The sprig was tied there by the herb woman after your last fever, just to make sure it does not come back too quickly. You have argued with yourself, in quieter moments, about which of these things truly does anything. You have listened to the priest insist that it is God alone, through the sacraments, who gives grace and protection. You have heard him warn against trusting too much in small objects. You have nodded when he said it, and you have still reached up to touch each of them in turn on nights when sleep was hard to find. Now, with the weight of years pressing on your shoulders, you feel less and less need to separate everything into categories. Holy or not holy, true or false, faith or superstition. You have seen too many people survive or die in ways that do not line up neatly with any rule. You know only this. When you were young and frightened, touching those things helped. When your child burned with fever, you said the church prayers and the old rhymes, and you did not care which syllables carried the cure, only that the fever broke. When a storm threatened the harvest, you walked in the rogation procession with the priest and also muttered under your breath the same field charm your grandmother taught you. Were you wrong? Were you weak? Were you simply human, trying to stitch together any scrap of help you could find? These questions circle you more often now. Not because you doubt what you have done, but because you feel time narrowing, and you want, if you can, to pass on something truer than pure fear. In the evenings, children gather at your feet more often than they used to. Your hands move through familiar tasks, spinning, carting, sorting beans, while your mouth moves through familiar stories. At first you tell the tales you heard as a child, saints who calmed storms, devils who could not cross thresholds marked with chalk, ghosts who came back to ask that a stolen cloak be returned. The children listen, wide-eyed, their small faces flickering orange in the firelight. They shiver at the right places, laugh when the witch is tricked, sigh when the saint wins. If you stop, they nudge you. What happened next? Sometimes you tell them what happened next the way you first heard it. The demon is banished. The curse is broken. The witch flees. The saint raises his hand and all is well. Sometimes, though, you add a different ending. You say that the saint's miracle was the beginning, not the end,
that the people still had to rebuild their house after the flood, still had to share their bread more fairly so no one starved.
You have seen enough to know that miracles, when they come, are rarely neat. A sickness leaves a body, but leaves weakness behind. A war ends, but leaves empty places at the table. A field spared by hail stands next to one flattened, and no one can say exactly why. One night after a funeral, another one, slower than some, quicker than others. You sit with a small group near the hearth. The children have been sent to bed. The room smells of damp wool and grief. The conversation moves, as it always does on such nights, between sorrow and searching.
Why him? Someone says, not for the first time. Why him and not me? He was no worse.
The priest has already given the official answers. God's will, the mystery of his plan, the promise of heaven. You repeat them because they are true in the only way they can be true from where you stand. But you also add something of your own. We do not know why, you say. We never have. But we know we are still here, and we know what we must do for those who are left. You talk about sharing grain, about helping with the fields, about bringing water and wood to the widow, about watching the children. These are small, practical decisions, but you frame them the same way you would frame prayers, as offerings, as necessary acts in the face of something too large to grasp. You have learned, over years of watching bells ring for births and deaths and ordinary days, that faith without hands is too light to hold anything. Fear without stories becomes a weight that crushes. Folklore without kindness turns into suspicion and harm. You have spent a lifetime trying, clumsily, to braid those things together into something that lets you keep walking. Sometimes you see where the braid has frayed. There was a girl in the village now, not a child, not yet a woman. People whisper about her. She talks too much to herself. She wanders at odd hours. She stares too long at the sky. Her mother died when she was small. Her father drinks. It is easy for people to set her apart. When cows fall ill, or milk sours, or bread fails to rise, you hear her name more often. She passed by my house the day before, someone says. She looked at my cow, says another. The implication hangs in the air. You smell it before you hear the word witch. Your younger self might have joined in the suspicion. Fear makes it feel safer to agree with the crowd. Now, older, you feel something else as well. A jolt of recognition. You remember all the times when people might have looked at you the same way, if one day's coincidence had fallen differently. Times when your own strange dream could have been taken as a sign that you walked too close to forbidden things. So when talk grows thick around the girl, you speak more carefully. She is odd, you admit. But so is my aunt, and she never harmed anyone. Not everyone who walks alone at night walks with devils. You remind people of other causes. The damp summer. The new bull brought from elsewhere. The fact that the woman who lost her loaf leaves her dough too close to a draft. You do not deny the possibility of evil. The priest has taught you too often that the devil prowls. But you try to tilt the balance away from the easiest scapegoat. You do not always succeed. Sometimes suspicion rolls over your small words like a wheel over a stone. The girl is still watched. Children are still warned away. But perhaps because of your voice, a stone does not fly that might otherwise have flown. A curse is not shouted that might otherwise have been shouted. A rough plan to run her out at night dissolves instead into mutterings and shrugs. You know it is not much. In stories, a single brave word can turn a mob. In life, a single small defense might only slow the mob's gathering. But slowing is also a kind of protection. When spring returns again, another baby is born in your household. You are there when the tiny body emerges in a rush of blood and sweat, when the first thin cry pierces the room, when the exhausted mother sags back on the straw and laughs and sobs at once. The midwife moves swiftly, more from habit than from thought. She wipes, she wraps, she checks for 10 fingers and 10 toes. She murmurs a blessing that sits somewhere between church Latin and old hedge words. You join her, your hands shaking slightly as you take the small bundle for a moment and peer into the crumpled, furious face.
"What's her name?" someone asks later. The answer comes. A saint's name, of course. A name the priest will recognize, that will look proper in his book.
You know that is only one of her names. She will carry other names too. Names that are not written down. Little Crow, perhaps, if her hair stays dark and her nose sharp. Quick Hands, if she grows nimble with thread. Names whispered by family, by friends, by people who love her and people who fear her. You will be the one, often, who holds her on your knee and teaches her first prayers. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, you will say, guiding her tiny hand to make the sign of the cross. Your fingers will swallow hers. Your voice will be slow and patient. At the same time, you will be the one who tells her not to sleep with her feet pointing out the door, because it invites bad things in. You will tell her not to whistle at night, because it calls what you do not want to answer. You will say when she hesitates at a crossroads after dark, "If you do not know which way to go, say a Hail Mary and choose the path to your right." Will she sort these instructions neatly into piles? Real religion? Old superstition? Probably not. She will take them all in together, as you did, as pieces of a single way of being in the world. A way in which almost everything has meaning, and almost nothing is entirely safe. As a child grows, you watch her play with other children in the graveyard, weaving between stones the way you once did. They hop over mounds, call to one another from behind crosses, leave small tokens, flowers, pebbles, bits of colored thread on certain graves. You hear them making up stories as they play, about who is buried where, about which graves are good and which are bad, about the ghost that definitely walks under the yew tree at night. From the church door, the priest watches sometimes and frowns. He tells them to show respect, to remember that these are sacred resting places. He tells them that the dead are with God, not wandering the lanes. You do not correct him. You say amen when he says such things in sermons. But when you yourself walk through the graveyard with a child at your side, you point out certain stones. "Here is your grandfather," you say. "He used to sing that silly harvest song, do you remember? Here is the woman who always had a crust for the beggar children, even when she had little herself. Here lies the boy who died in the last sickness. He was about your age. We light a candle for him sometimes." You talk of the dead as if they are still part of the village, because in many ways they are. Their names are still spoken. Their stories are still told. Their choices, kind or cruel, still ripple through the present. The child listens. Her small brow furrows. "Can they hear us?" she asks. You think of all the times you have spoken to certain graves yourself, in anger or in longing. You think of nights when you felt, absurdly and deeply, that someone gone was listening. You think of the priest's insistence that the dead are in God's hands alone. "Maybe," you say, "maybe they hear. But even if they don't, we hear, and that matters." She accepts this, for now. Children can hold maybes more easily than grown people can. There comes a day when your body finally insists that it is done with certain tasks. You cannot lift as much as you used to. Your hands cramp on cold mornings. Your eyes blur when you try to mend by poor light. You find yourself sitting more often, watching instead of doing, calling advice across the room instead of reaching for the tool yourself. At first, this idleness feels like a punishment. Work has been the shape of your days for so long that without it you feel formless. You listen to others' footsteps, to their grunts of effort, and shame pricks at you. Slowly, another shape emerges. You may not be able to carry as much on your back, but you carry more in your memory. When someone wonders aloud what happened the last time the well ran low, you remember. When someone frets about whether it is better to plant early or late in a year like this, you can say, "The year the frost came after the first buds, we planted again, and it barely saved us." Your mind becomes a storehouse, one that others come to without always realizing they're doing it. You also become, whether you like it or not, An example of how to age in a world where aging is itself a kind of miracle. Many do not live as long as you have. Children see that survival is possible, even if it has cost you much. Adults see that if they live, they may end up like you. Slower, yes, but not useless, still woven into the life of the village. You have always wondered, from another time, how peasants made sense of a life that seemed so narrow, so bound by hardship. From within, you realize that narrowness is also depth. When your world is small, every pattern in it matters more. The way the bell sounds in fog versus in clear air. The way the sky looks on the first frost day. The way someone's voice changes when they are hiding something. Faith, fear, and folklore are not separate boxes you take off a shelf when needed. They are the water in which you swim. You pray without thinking of it as religion. You mutter old sayings without thinking of them as superstition. You feel afraid without always naming the thing you fear. At the end, when your own body begins to falter in ways no herb, no charm, no prayer seems able to reverse, you find yourself lying in the same sort of bed where you have watched others lie. The straw presses through the cloth. The blanket is heavy and smells faintly of smoke. The faces around you are ones you know. Family, neighbors, the priest, the midwife who has become in these years also the layer out of the dead. You are not surprised. You have seen this scene so often you could recite the gestures like a litany. Cold cloth on the forehead, lips moistened with water, fingers closing around a hand that is slowly losing its grip. You say the prayers you have always said. Your voice is weaker, but the words are strong from use. You ask for forgiveness, for mercy, for the saints to come and meet you. In a corner of your mind, another set of words unspools. The old protections you once muttered against nightmares, the field charms, the tales of people who saw lights at the moment of death. They swirl together, not in conflict, but like different threads of the same long story. The priest leans close, his breath warm on your cheek, and murmurs the final rites. Oil touches your forehead, your hands. You feel the sign of the cross traced on your skin, a familiar map drawn one last time. You think, for a moment, of all the times fear has shaped your choices. Fear of hunger, of war, of sickness, of demons, of God. You think of all the times faith has steadied you, even when you did not fully understand what, exactly, you were trusting. You think of all the stories you have told and been told, saints and witches, ghosts and miracles, curses and blessings, how they have calmed or sharpened your fears by turns. You wonder what someone from another age would make of this moment. Would they see only ignorance, terror, clinging to charms and crosses in a dark room? Or would they see what you feel? A life that has tried, in its limited way, to respond to an unmanageable world with meaning, with ritual, with connection. You have no answer. And soon, you no longer have the breath to ask the question. Your world narrows to the sound of someone praying by your bed, to the roughness of cloth against your cheek, to the faint smell of wax. You feel a hand in yours, and the sensation of letting go and holding on at once. And then, for you, it is done. But the village goes on. The bell rings in the pattern that tells everyone whether you are man or woman, child or elder. People stop, listen, count. Someone says your name. Someone remembers a story you told. Someone else mutters that you died on a lucky or unlucky day, depending on which tale they believe. At your grave, the priest speaks from the book. Earth falls on the coffin. Your name is scratched or carved onto wood or stone. Children stand by and watch, their eyes bright with curiosity and fear. One of them, perhaps the girl you once taught, slips a tiny flower onto the mound when no one is looking, because she remembers that you always liked that patch of wild things by the hedgerow. In the weeks and years that follow, bits of you remain in the village in ways you could never have planned. People repeat your sayings without remembering they were yours. Someone tells a child, Your grandmother used to touch the field and say this little rhyme, and it always seemed to help. Someone else remembers how you insisted on visiting the sick, even when others were afraid. Another recalls that you once stood up for a strange girl when people muttered, "Witch." The stories people tell about you are mixtures of fact and embroidery, faith and fear and folklore, all tangled. You become, in their mouths, a little more patient than you really were, or a little more stubborn, or a little more wise. They make a character out of your life, the same way you made characters out of the lives before yours. This is how everyday medieval life carries itself forward. Not only in ledgers or in great chronicles written by monks, but in small, worn stories told by fires, and in fields, and at wells. Stories of who prayed and who cursed, who feared and who comforted, who trusted saints and who blamed stars, who saw omens in the sky and who planted anyway. You have always wondered, from the outside, how faith, fear, and folklore shape the days of people like you. From the inside, the answer is so ordinary, it is easy to miss. They shape everything. When you rise and when you sleep, when you plant and when you reap, when you bury your dead and when you cradle your newborns, when you look at a strange cloud and decide whether to see a weather sign or a warning from God, when you hear a cough and decide whether to call the priest, the healer, or both. They give you reasons to act when reason alone would leave you paralyzed. They give you words to put around the things that terrify you. They give you excuses to share bread you can barely spare because some story told you that generosity protects your house. They give you comfort that someone, somewhere, saint, angel, ancestor, is paying attention. They also sometimes turn you against your neighbor, or make you mistrust a lonely girl, or tempt you to blame a charm instead of your own hard heart. You are not blind to that. No one living close to gossip and funerals can be. But in the long run of your life, when you lie awake listening to the wind rack the cottage and wondering if the roof will hold, you do not try to sort everything out. You simply reach for whatever thread you can grasp, a psalm half remembered, an old rhyme about storms, the memory of your grandmother saying, "We lived through worse." You hold that thread in your fist until sleep, or morning, or mercy comes. And if someone, centuries later, imagines themselves into your straw bed, your damp field, your smoky church, they will feel the same weight you have felt. The weight of a world too big for one pair of hands, held up anyway by small rituals, small prayers, small stories, carried year after year by people whose names the world has forgotten, but whose lives once filled every inch of the days. You have always wondered, so you stepped into their shoes. Now you know, not in tidy answers, but in the slow heaviness of a life lived under bells and clouds and watchful eyes. And in that knowing, the questions do not vanish. They simply become quieter, like doubts settling to the bottom of a cup, leaving the surface clear enough to reflect a single, ordinary face.